And they said all we had to do is for you to be young and pretty and for us to be in the same room. And then they can write up love or maybe infatuation or anything they like in the report because it's their report. Can you imagine my life has been turned upside down, but actually this sheer realization is just a standard MI6 operation. It's just what they do.
Welcome to this episode of Going Rogue with Lara Logan. They say that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And the woman you're going to hear from today certainly has the fury of hell behind her as she investigates what was done to her by the American traitors who conspired to overthrow a legally elected president and created the false Russia collusion narrative where they targeted Svetlana Lokhova and falsely accused her of being a Russian spy. Now, before we get to that interview, which is going to center around very significant developments in a case in Florida involving John Brennan and many of the other co-conspirators in the Russia collusion case, we have a word from one of our sponsors. Something important is happening right now, and most people haven't noticed yet. One of the largest financial institutions in the world, Bank of America, is openly discussing a scenario where gold could reach levels near $5,000 per ounce by the end of 2026, and silver could move into triple-digit pricing based on long-term market factors. That kind of conversation doesn't happen casually. Rising government debt, persistent inflation pressures, growing global demand for physical metals, and increasing concerns about currencies that can be created at will. When the major institutions start framing gold and silver this way, it signals a broader shift taking place. That's why many Americans are choosing to learn more through monetary gold. For more than 25 years, they've helped people understand physical gold and silver, whether held directly or as part of long-term financial planning. No pressure, no hype, just clear information and real people you can talk to. If you want to understand why gold and silver are getting this level of attention and see what options are available, now is a smart time to get informed. Visit laralovesgold.com or call 800-888-0807 to request the complimentary gold guide. Because when the conversation starts at this level, paying attention early matters. All right. Welcome back to Going Rogue with Lara Logan. My guest today is a formidable woman, Svetlana Lokhova. I have become so fond of you over the time that we've gotten to know each other. I felt for you many years ago because I knew that you had been falsely targeted. They said that you were a Russian spy. They said that you were having an affair with General Flynn, someone I've known for more than 25 years, and along with his wife, Lori. And if there's anyone who would never have an affair with anyone, it is General Michael Flynn. So I knew from the moment that was printed that it was a lie. But your life was turned upside down. We've covered that in a wonderful interview on the show previously. I would urge anyone who wants the background to Svetlana's story to understand, just what it was like for her to be falsely targeted and smeared, have the world's media hounding her, have the intelligence agencies from the United States and from the UK coming after her, how this professor, history professor in a specific part of Russian history, became the center of one of the largest scandals in the history of the United States of America. I know they turned up your life, they turned it upside down, and really put you through hell, Svetlana, but you are a formidable woman. You have, we were laughing about this in I think it was a 6, 7, 8 hour phone call we had, where you have made this your entire life. getting justice, getting the truth out, fighting for all of the people who were targeted in this conspiracy has become your life's work. Even though you're a mom and a wife, you can't tell people where you are located because you're still being targeted because this conspiracy is ongoing. But one of the things that you alerted me to is this case that is going on in Florida involving John Brennan, the former head of the CIA, who was one of Obama, Comey, Clapper's co-conspirators in a seditious, treasonous conspiracy to overthrow not just the president of the United States who'd been legally elected, but the will of the American people. And this case is not getting that much attention in the media. Yet, curiously, it's getting quite a bit of attention from John Brennan and from Andrew McCabe, who was deputy director of the CIA, who was also a co-conspirator, and from a couple of other people like Peter Strzok, the treasonous former, I think, deputy director of counterintelligence under Bill Priestap, and of course Lisa Page, his lover at the FBI, who has admitted to Congress now to a lot of her crimes, yet still has not been held accountable along with the rest of them. But this may be a day of reckoning because they've all been subpoenaed in the grand jury that has been convened to address the origins of Crossfire Hurricane and the Russia collusion investigation inside the FBI. Why? Because we all know now from all the documents and all the evidence that's been released that it was 100% corrupt. It was treason. This is a real conspiracy, folks. It's not a conspiracy theory. This is a legal conspiracy called treason and sedition. And it is an actual crime. So many of us are wondering about accountability. But the one woman who's like an encyclopedia as a professor, she didn't become a professor by being dumb, but Svetlana Lokhova has spent the better part of 10 years now studying this. She worked with the Durham investigation. She has read every single document, everything in the annex, every note in every annex. She has documents that were declassified by President Trump, then reclassified by Joe Biden after he stole the election, and then declassified again by President Trump when he came into office. They tried to say that President Trump gave her classified documents. That was a lie. They haven't stopped going after her, and she hasn't stopped fighting. So, Svetlana, can you take us through this case in Florida that you think is so significant and just explain what it's really about?
Well, hello, Lara. Thank you so much for having me on again, and thank you for your audience for spending time with us this afternoon or morning. Okay, and first of all, you're right that we're finally seeing hopefully accountability. We obviously don't know because we've unfortunately seen in the cases where, for example, they indicted Jim Comey, that unfortunately the judicial system is in a very bad place. We have activist judges, we have this completely brainwashed juries, and we have corrupt prosecutors and everything in between. So usually I would say, having dealt with this whole thing for about 10 years and having hoped for accountability for 10 years, I initially, to be honest, gave up on hoping that there will be any accountability because when I worked closely with the Durham investigation, I was told, and I had a prosecutor assigned to this Russiagate cases who was speaking to me. I knew there was going to be prosecutions. They got as far as putting Hillary Clinton under oath and John Brennan under oath. It was a criminal investigation. And then, boom, it just disappeared. Nothing happened. So I frankly did not expect anything to happen. Then, of course, they almost, they raided the president's home. Then, obviously, he was almost assassinated. Then they were trying to jail him. So the end result was that, not only there were never going to be accountability, it looked like, we had the mugshot, being paraded around of the president of the United States. So it looked like not only the bad guys will never go to jail, but in fact, the good guy who was trying to bring them to account is instead going to go to jail for the rest of his life. So that was that. And then only through some amazing, I suppose, grace, I don't know how else to call it, President Trump somehow managed to come back, and you guys somehow managed to vote him in, and I suppose you arrived in such droves to vote him in that they couldn't do anything about this particular election, and he came back. And the first thing he did is he promised, among other things, he promised accountability.
That's correct.
And he promised it for two reasons. One is obviously because, those who committed crimes need to be held accountable. He is the chief law enforcement of the United States. Chief law enforcement officer of the United States. So as the president, he actually has the responsibility to hold the bad guys accountable. It's his job. Literally.
That is correct. In fact, it's a constitutional right that Americans have for redress of grievance. And the people who know that this was treason and sedition have a serious grievance. While the global financial elite has been secretly accumulating wealth through cryptocurrency, ordinary Americans have been systematically excluded. So today, I want to tell you about BlockTrust IRA. They're bringing crypto wealth to everyday people using advanced AI technology that breaks the stranglehold of the hidden powers who control our financial system. I've partnered with BlockTrust IRA because I believe there's an intentional barrier between regular people and financial independence, and it's created by those who don't want to share what you're entitled to. BlockTrust IRA has a powerful trading platform, Animus AI, and it works 24/7, analyzing market data and executing advanced crypto strategies beyond the simple buy and hold. It exposes the lie that regular people like us should just sit and hold, while hedge fund elites trade with sophisticated algorithms. That's why their system was named the #1 crypto technology platform by Bitcoin Magazine, and it beat out over 1,500 global competitors. So whether you're a teacher or a truck driver or a small business owner or a retiree, and you're watching manipulated markets erode your 401k, BlockTrust IRA's Animus AI arms you with the same tools insiders use against financial tyranny. Clients are seeing over 250% returns on their investments, protected by military-grade security and up to $200 million in insurance against interference. Don't wait. Visit LaraLoganCrypto.com to join the financial revolution, fighting back against the hidden powers keeping you dependent on their failing system. For a limited time, they're offering viewers up to $2,500 in bonus crypto when you open an account. Crypto created 80,000 new millionaires just last year. Why not you? Visit LaraLoganCrypto.com. That's LaraLoganCrypto.com for financial freedom.
And the second thing is what you've just said about, sedition and treason, is that he wanted to make sure it will never happen again in the future, because one is punishing the people who did it, but the second thing about dealing with crime is to make sure you prevent the crime happening again. And this is the crime of the century. And so he promised this accountability, and he gave a big speech at the Department of Justice saying that he's going to give this accountability. He put the people in place like Tulsi Gabbard as the director of national intelligence, like John Radcliffe as the director of the CIA, like Kash Patel as the director of the FBI, Pam Bondi. He put all the people in place and said, okay, we're gonna work on accountability. The next thing that happened, of course, that took time. So that was so obviously he was inaugurated in the end of January. Then there were a few months to get people, confirmed and put into place. And then the very first thing he did when he could is he declassified the Crossfire Hurricane documents. So he signed an executive order, and there's a video, he's holding it up. Susie Wiles is sitting next to him. So for him, it's a huge, huge deal. He declassified his documents. By doing so, he now paved the way towards accountability, because now, you can hold trials, right? Because you will now have the evidence, which previously was classified, but then they were hidden.
What they do, right? They hide behind that classification, right, Svetlana? And they say, well, even Durham, right? People don't realize that they didn't give Durham access to all of the information because they classified it. And so he was flying blind in many respects.
Or even worse, as we'll discuss later, President Trump declassified documents, Durham had access to them, then they reclassified them, and therefore Durham prepared all the prosecutions and was forced to abandon them because they raided his home, president's home, and took the documents away. So President Trump then reclassified again for the second time the same documents.
Yeah.
And then the next thing he did is, obviously, this prosecution began, and the very lucky thing. So obviously the raid of the president's home in Mar-A-Lago, for people, just to remind you, what happened is in 2022. So this is, 2 years after Biden was elected, well, 1.5, not elected, but,
he still re-elected and was put in place. Yep.
Put in place. They were hoping that President Trump is never going to run again. He's never going to come back.
Oh, yeah. And they intended to put him away forever.
And when he indicated that he's gonna come back, he's gonna run again. So they were trying to tie him up with his Gen 6 setup, etc. So when he indicated he's gonna come back, they raided his home in Mar-A-Lago, Florida. And there was a huge raid. In fact, so Pam Bondi, who's he's attorney general now. She was actually his lawyer on the case, and Lindsay Halligan was there. She's the prosecutor on the Comey case. They were actually there in Florida when it all happened. He luckily was not at home because remember they also authorized this horrible use of deadly force, and they came like on helicopters and boats, and the FBI were involved, and there were dozens and dozens of people involved, and it was horrible. Right? Like everyone probably remembers this footage. But what people sort of maybe forget by now is why did they do it? So first of all, it's unprecedented raid. So obviously one is to send a message to him and his family that, we're going to get you if you try as much as to come back. But the second thing they did is they took away the documents that he held, that he declassified, which were the proof that a crime, this treason, a seditious conspiracy that was committed against him, he held documentary evidence that he was going to use during the re-election campaign in 2022, 23, 24, right, to get re-elected, to show how corrupt the deep state is. That's the documents that he declassified. So they took those documents out of his home and retroactively reclassified them. Now,
retroactively classified them again, yes. To stop President Trump using them in his re-election campaign because they show what?
So, treasonous conspiracy. And you actually explained it to me very well that we have, in a sense, two cases, right? So one case is seditious conspiracy. So sedition is, conspiracy is when it's more than one person. They come together to do something, right? And this was first, actually, I think it was Rudy Giuliani or people like that who I think used it in New York cases against the mafia.
Yes, RICO cases to destroy the mafia.
RICO cases, because what would happen is the guy at the top... Sorry, carry on.
Rudy Giuliani is famous for what he did with RICO prosecutions against the mafia. Yeah, it was
right.
It was
and this is what we're looking at here. So the way it happens is the guy at the top is always going to say, "I didn't know anything about it," right? So you could always catch the guy who actually executed the crime. But it's very, very difficult to catch other people who co-conspired or who ordered the crimes to happen. Whereas the way it works with the RICO cases is once you establish that there was a conspiracy, that people were going to act, to commit a crime together, then it doesn't actually matter if you know each other. It doesn't matter whether you know what the other person is doing. So as long as you are together further in the conspiracy, or you can call it joint venture. So this is something that Durham prosecutors were trying to do. As long as you're all acting in furtherance of that conspiracy, then you're all liable for it, whether or not you specifically did this thing or that thing or not, right? So, for example, if there was
just like all of them that are still going out today, furthering the conspiracy by accusing Trump of weaponizing the justice system and so on and so on. This is what people don't realize is that they try to say that this happened in 2016 and the statute of limitations was over in 2022, but it wasn't. Not just because the Mar-A-Lago raid happened in 2022, which is part of the cover-up, which is part of the conspiracy, but because the conspiracy is still ongoing today. They still haven't acknowledged it and they still haven't ended it.
That's right, because they have to disavow. Each person in the conspiracy has to disavow the conspiracy, and they haven't.
Legally, to meet the legal requirement for the conspiracy to have ended, that's what they have to do by law.
Yeah, because you'd still be charged up to the point where you disavow it, but at least it stops the clock.
Correct.
Whereas the clock is still ticking into the future. That's why the statute of limitation...
Yeah.
And the way it works is that what is the actual conspiracy? Like, what did they actually do? Well, what they did is first they interfered in the election in 2016 to try and stop President Donald Trump, so candidate Trump, from becoming president. Mm-hmm. But then from the moment he's elected, you guys elected him, right, as American people, mm-hmm. that becomes sedition because now they're overthrowing U.S. government. Correct. So now no longer they're interfering in the election, they're overthrowing the U.S. government. And this is where it becomes interesting. This is something you actually told me, Lara, and I never thought about it that way, is that Tulsi Gabbard specifically called it treasonous conspiracy. And, the word treason gets like thrown around quite a lot. So people sort of used to saying that. What does that actually mean? And you that explained to me that involves foreigners.
Correct.
So sedition is when you conspire, a bunch of people conspire, right, to overthrow the government.
Citizen.
But treason is when also there's Americans conspire with people outside America, outside the United States. And that's where, once we go later through the documents, that's where it becomes very interesting because John Brennan, the CIA director, and other people involved, which we'll come back to, Peter Strzok and others, they all work with the United Kingdom, with British intelligence and also Australians and other countries. Yes. And that's why Tulsi is very specific when she says, Director Gabbard so specific when she says there was a treasonous conspiracy, because not only they were overthrowing the government, but they were doing it with help of foreigners, other countries.
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly what happened. This powder does 3 things that they will charge you $10,000 for, but the FDA approved it, so there's nothing they can do. It releases stem cells from your bone marrow, makes you 27% harder to kill, and it floods everything with nitric oxide. Listen to Dr. Simon Mills, one of the top herbal medicine researchers in the world.
Dark chocolate is a medicine, end of. It's one of the best medicines around. It's 50 grams, 100 grams of 75% or more dark chocolate. Brain health as well, cardiovascular health. They do studies where they've put cocoa into volunteers that meet students usually, so young kids, and they were able to show changes in the blood flow within minutes, certainly within an hour of eating cocoa. Beneficial changes in your blood flow.
We call it the heart medicine.
Yeah, heart, circulation, brain, but it also, of course, we know it contains a few other beneficial stimulating effects, sort of similar to the effects of the coffee, which incidentally, as I already said, is a medicine as well. But cocoa and chocolate does have an uplifting effect, which is why we love it so.
That's right, dark chocolate. But here's where people get it wrong. The flavonols, the part that actually does something, get destroyed when chocolate is processed. Regular chocolate has 50 milligrams of dead flavonols. This Black Forest high flavanol cocoa powder has 1,200 milligrams of pharmaceutically extracted flavonols. Normally, you can't claim benefits in the supplement world, but this, the FDA signed off on a health claim saying cocoa flavonols support heart health and reduce cardiovascular risk. And trust me, it's not just about the FDA. The evidence on this stuff was so strong, it couldn't be ignored. Studies showed the brain gets sharper 8.6 seconds faster in cognitive tests. Blood flow where it counts, 80% improvement. And the heart gets stronger, 27% less death. All proven through a 21,000 human case study trial conducted by Harvard. The results were so definitive, the FDA approved it. They take the finest cocoa, they extract the flavonols, and they concentrate it into this, made right here in the USA. Cocoa prices have been skyrocketing worldwide over the last few months, so I don't expect prices to be this cheap anytime soon. If you've been thinking about trying it, act now. After 48 hours, this promo will be over, so stock up before it's gone. Take control of your health before someone else does it for you.
The next, so this is just like we've defined what we're looking at. And then the conspiracy runs from 2015. So from the moment that candidate Donald Trump announced his candidacy when he came down famously down that golden escalator in summer 2015. And it runs to today, but the specific events, and I'm quoting David Nunes, who used to be on the Gang of Eight, so he used to be the key person within the...
a congressman out of California who famously wrote that memo, which laid out the truth, and then Adam Schiff, accused him of lying, and Adam Schiff has since been shown to be lying about everything, and Devin Nunes's memo was 100% correct.
That's right. And David Nunes was the head of the committee on them. So after Watergate and other events, there's a Church Committee, etc. They created the House Intelligence Committee to provide the oversight of the intelligence community. And people on this committee have access, security clearances, and access to all the classified information, including any CIA operations. And so David Nunes was the chair of this committee. He was investigating Russiagate. So initially he was investigating, was there any collusion between Trump and Russia? But actually very quickly he found out actually not only there was no collusion between Trump and Russia, but in fact there was conspiracy against President Trump. And he famously says that it's 10 years conspiracy, and it starts from the moment he announced his candidacy for presidential election, because they wanted to stop, Donald Trump, and we can talk about, how and why, basically the global elites conspired. They didn't want, they didn't want this candidates of change of, who's going to go after their corruption. And then it continued through Crossfire Hurricane, which is the investigation of the Trump campaign. In fact, it was not an investigation. It was a setup. Then it went into the fabrication of the intelligence community assessment, which made the finding that President Trump was installed by
the Russians.
Russia.
This is one that John Brennan was responsible for.
Right. That's right. And that was done on orders of Obama, because when Tulsi Gabbard famously gave a press conference talking about this treasonous conspiracy, she found documents showing that the assessment was prepared by the intelligence community, saying it was just a normal election. 2016 was just a normal election. And then they have an order that she found from Obama directly saying, no, change it, right? And make it look like President Trump was installed by Russia.
Yes, and who did that for him? That was John Brennan.
John Brennan, Jim Clapper, Jim Comey. How we know that, we actually have the emails that Tulsi Gabbard released, where General Rogers, is voicing concerns about this, the head of because he didn't even have the time to look at the underlying evidence, because there isn't any to reach this conclusion. And Jim Clapper, copying Brennan and Comey, says, it's our story, we're sticking to it, be it team sport, and just basically sign it off.
And Rogers folded.
But the main thing is that they actually, so this document shows the conspiracy, right? You have to further the conspiracy. You have to have a goal. That's right. What's the goal? Is to de-legitimize the president. Yeah. And so what they're doing by saying that it wasn't American people who voted for President Trump, it was actually a foreign country who installed them. They could then overthrow him, right, by using the pretext that they're acting in the interest of national security, they're acting in the interest of the country, because he's not a real president, right? So it's the job of the CIA, of the FBI, of the outgoing president to protect America from this traitor, this imposter, right? Yes. That's how they made it look. But in fact, it is a conspiracy, and we know that because they wrote it down. So not only we know that because we know it, but because luckily these conspirators left the documents. And we'll come back in a second, because it started with Hillary Clinton, and then when she lost the election, then it continued under Obama to try and overthrow the president and install another Republican candidate that suited the deep state. Yes. Then when that didn't work, they ended up getting into, they caused the Mueller investigation, which continued by the same path. And the purpose of the Mueller investigation was to impeach President Trump or persuade him to resign, like they persuaded Nixon to resign.
They thought he would fall, yeah.
And they were going to install Mike Pence. So it continues, the conspiracy continues. Then when Mueller thing didn't work, but all the way through, of course, they were impeding his administration, right? Because he couldn't do anything.
Him at every turn.
Right. Then when that didn't work, right, the next step in the conspiracy is the Ukraine impeachment, which, you mentioned Adam Schiff. So the fake Ukraine impeachment where they accused him of, bad things again, like Russia, Ukraine, it kind of made it sound similar, right? Then they did that. And again, it's all the same people. Devin Nunes always says always the same people. So that it's about about 2,000 people or more. There's a lot more of them, but that we can count, right? They keep repeating the same thing over and over again. And what's interesting about the Ukraine impeachment is something I think we raised in the previous interview is Maggie Goodlander. So she's the ringleader of the Seditious Six, but she's also the wife of Jake Sullivan, who is the architect of Russiagate, and he's a very close advisor to Hillary Clinton and Obama. So he was going to be next president after Clinton.
And he was deputy national security advisor under Biden, and responsible for the betrayal of our allies in Afghanistan and the murder of countless Afghans.
Right, exactly. And then guys, anything bad, you can always find Jake Sullivan, involved.
And Ben Rhodes and Susan Rice and Avril Haines and Lisa Monaco and all of them.
That's right, always the same people.
Norm Eisen.
So Maggie Goodlander, the wife of Jake Sullivan, she worked with Norm Eisen, who I think we discussed is a huge lawfare guy, on this Ukraine impeachment, along with Adam Schiff and other people. So again, this wasn't the real impeachment. Again, it was fabrication, so the conspiracy continued.
Another setup, another part of the conspiracy to set President Trump up.
Right. Then the next thing, we can go on and on, but just in terms of highlights, in terms of highlights, the next thing is this famous laptop letter. Yeah. So remember that, Rudy Giuliani, found this information where Hunter Biden, the son of presidential candidate Joe Biden, he abandoned his laptop, and on the laptop there was evidence not only of sexual deviancy but also of the corrupt dealings of the of the Biden family. And that information was very important for the election campaign because it showed American people had the right to know that their candidate, one of the candidates is seriously corrupt. Right. And what happened is the same people, so this is the 51 spiteful leaders, they call them, but of them, there were about 6 CIA directors, right? And, they say former. Right. They say spiteful light. They say former, but there's no such thing as, Lara, of a former CIA director. And in fact, the current CIA director at the time, Gina Haspel, right? She actually allowed all of this to happen. And then people involved, so for example, Blinken, who became Biden's Secretary of State. We have John Brennan involved in this letter, right? We have Mike Morrell. All these guys, Leon Panetta, all these guys involved in this, they're the same guys who were involved in Russiagate originally, right? So the same people always doing the same thing. And Biden famously in the debate used this assessment. Remember how previously the same people assessed that Trump was installed by Russia? The same people assessed through this letter, right, that that the Hunter Biden laptop is Russian disinformation. And therefore
dragging up the same old thing, the same old conspiracy that they invented in the very beginning in 2016. They did it again in 2020, and they're still doing it now. Every time Trump tries to do anything with President Putin, anything for Ukraine peace talks, they still say once again that Trump is showing that he has the special relationship with Russia and special relationship with Putin. They're using the same conspiracy that they have yet to acknowledge, and they lie about it constantly.
Right. And so there we have the same people. There are many other things, I'm sure, but I'm just giving a sort of bird's eye view. And I'm basically following the things that, that Devin Nunes outlined because he had access to all this information. These are the sort of high points or low points, if you like, of the conspiracy. And then finally we arrive at this Mar-A-Lago raid where President Trump was holding evidence, declassified evidence of their crimes.
Which he declassified before he left office, by the way. And just very briefly, for people who are not familiar with how information is classified, it is always the responsibility of the issuing agency to classify or declassify information. So if it comes out of the CIA, they classify it. And if somebody wants to use part of that information, they have to go to the CIA. They say, can you declassify this in whole or in part? And they do it. And that applies to the NSA, the NRO, the DIA, the State Department. It doesn't matter who it is. However, there's one person under American law who the act of speaking is an act of declassification. And that is the President of the United States of America. So before Trump leaves office, after the 2020 election is stolen, he declassifies these documents, which is his legal right and authority as President of the United States. Then, of course, the Biden administration comes in. They realize that they're in real trouble. Right? They're in real trouble. And so what do? They reclassify these documents. I just want people to understand how devious it is what they're doing, because you know firsthand, Svetlana, you had some of those documents which you acquired when they were declassified, so it was completely legal. And once they reclassify them, they try to accuse you of having classified documents. I mean, these people are disgusting. But anyway, that's just so for people to understand is when they say, oh, the president had classified documents at Mar-A-Lago, well, they weren't classified when he took those documents, and he had the legal right to have them. And it's nobody else has the legal right, not the vice president, not any sitting U.S. senator like Joe Biden when he had classified information at his home, only the president of the United States. So the entire thing was once again a massive lie and a setup.
That's right. So what happened is on the last day, or last week of President Trump's first term, he issued an executive order, you can find it on the White House website, authorizing the declassification of the Crossfire Hurricane documents. And we'll come back to that later when we start discussing the origins of the conspiracy. But just to remind people, Crossfire Hurricane was the name of the FBI investigation of the Trump campaign, ostensibly to investigate whether candidate Trump colluded with Russia, with Putin, in order to win the election. But in fact, there was a form of the election interference by the CIA, by the FBI, in order to stop Donald Trump becoming president.
And I just have to say, Svetlana, just to remind people that during that campaign and after he was elected president, President Trump actually spoke about the fact that his campaign was spied upon. And everybody said he was a liar. He said he was wiretapped, and then they mocked him for that because they said nobody does wiretapping anymore. But the point of it was that Crossfire Hurricane is the evidence that Donald Trump actually was spied upon. So when they accused him of being a big liar, he wasn't lying at all. He was 100% correct.
Well, that's right. And the two things which were, depending on the time, we can go into detail later, but the two things he actually wrote the two correct things. One, he wrote, there is a spy on my campaign, he famously wrote, and that spy was politically motivated and, ordered by Obama and Clinton, and then that spy was being paid millions of dollars. And people don't understand who he's talking about. And he's talking about Stefan Halper, who's the CIA dirty ops guy. And President Trump couldn't mention him by name because otherwise they'd jail him for endangering national security because the information about him was still classified. So he wrote about this in 17 and 18, but
he could have mentioned him by name.
Svetlana,
he could have mentioned him by name because the act of speaking by the president is an act of declassification. However, he was pressured by the people around him, as usual. Don't do this because you're going to do that. You can't do this. You can't do that. He gets put under all this pressure, and he's actually has demonstrated that he's quite a reasonable man because he often, goes out of his way to preserve national security when he's told that something is a national security threat. And what in fact was happening is that dirty people around the president were protecting his CIA asset, Stefan Halper.
That's right, because the main person who persuaded President Trump not to do it, not to declassify any documents about Halper, was Gina Haspel. And Gina Haspel was the CIA director, but previously she used to be the head of the London station of the CIA. So she ran Stefan Halper. So she had to hide the evidence of the CIA involvement in the election interference. And she said, and it's been widely reported, that should the spy be named, the person who was spying on his campaign, but he was doing worse, right? He was lying. Right? So he was spying, but he was lying. That should any information about him be released, then it would endanger CIA assets So because he was, all the Stefan Halper is like a dirty trickster guy. So he's like an old Bush
He does
operative.
a lot of dirty work for the CIA. And so they we need people like this. They've done a lot of stuff for America. They have a whole history. There's all the other people like this. They come up with every excuse
and specifically
for why you can't do the right thing. And then they'll tell him, but we need to get to the other people that he's working with or whatever. They come up with whatever they can. And the reality is what they were doing was protecting the CIA because it was running this operation, and they were protecting all their other assets and co-conspirators, because the director of the FBI was involved, the deputy director was involved, the head of counterintelligence, the deputy head of counterintelligence, other FBI agents. And then, Department of Justice was involved, the CIA was involved, and their counterparts in British intelligence, in MI6, in MI5, and then, of course, the Australian ambassador, Alexander Downer, and so on, and all the way to Ukraine, by the way, because Ukraine was also involved. And that's who they were really protecting. And once again, President Trump got rid of a bad guy at the CIA. Then he got Gina Haspel, and she was just as bad.
Well, she was probably worse because what he didn't realize is she's the one who's, so Mike Pompeo persuaded him to install, Gina Haspel, who was his protege. But the reason why they had to install Gina Haspel is because she was running CIA operations out of London. And if you just take one step back, so the way that works, and I think, your audience is very familiar with the terminology about color revolutions, is CIA has this very storied history about overthrowing either regimes or democratically elected leaders, depending on your point of view. But in any way, one of their specialities, and they boast about it, right? Mm-hmm. They make a ton of money out of it, is they overthrow regimes. And previously...
And a color revolution essentially means that they do it using the local people. They make it look like a civilian uprising when it's really funded and fueled by the CIA.
Right. So there's different colors. Like the reason why it's called color revolution, as you say, is because so what happens is George Soros and people like him work with the CIA outside the United States, and they create
a network of NGOs.
They use real grievances that people have in order to put like demonstrations together, revolts together. They control the media. So
kind of
for example, So for example, we had in Cambridge one of the women who was working for the CIA, but actually for the CIA, who explained to us how they do this color revolution. It's kind of scary, right? Because they have the whole thing written out, and they're proud of it. They boast about it, from how they take down all the government communications channels and TV channels, and they get Anonymous to like hack the whole thing, into how they give people mobile phones with instructions, because they bring people into the capital city to do the demonstrations, but they're out of town, so they don't have the directions. So the CIA literally issues them a phone that gives them the direction of where to go. They issue them helmets, bulletproof jackets. They tell him the phone tells you where to go for medical aid. And I'm not just saying that, like, she wrote the book about it. She's like the DIA person, defense intelligence person, who is in fact working for the CIA, based out of Cambridge. They're boasting about it because they want other people to hire them to do that. And all the things I've just described, do you remember all these BLM protests? If you look at the picture of those, it would be very, very similar, because this is the first time they started doing color revolution inside the United States. So normally they overthrow the governments outside, but in this particular case, because they didn't want Donald Trump, they decided to do it against Americans, which is what the shocking thing is.
Well, they actually started it in 2016 when Trump won the first time with the protest against him. That was a much smaller way, but that was the beginning. And what they leave out of the book, what they don't tell you, Svetlana, is that what they also do, the other part of the color revolution, is that they have undercover operatives, clandestine operatives, who are on both sides, who will, for example, like they did in Ukraine, they will shoot police officers, law enforcement, soldiers of the state to make them think the protesters are using weapons and shooting them. And they will shoot protesters to make the other protesters believe that law enforcement or the state is killing their people. And so it's very sinister and deceptive what they do.
It is. And so what they were doing is that they have to prepare, and I think you taught me all this terminology, where they have to prepare the informational space first. So before they can run all these operations, right? They go through the media, they start creating this kind of smoke, this what is it? What's the terminology they use? The fog of war. The fog of war.
Yeah,
where they put so much information out there that you begin to believe it. So this was an intelligence operation by the CIA that would, and it started in 2015 because they have to start 1 year before, right, the election. So what they were doing is they were preparing the battlefield, so to speak. I think it's all this terminology you taught me. And what they would
do is they do all the articles that say it's Hillary Clinton's destiny to be president. She's fulfilling her destiny and blah, blah, blah. So they make you feel like it's inevitable because they know they're going to cheat. They know they're going to steal the election. That's why she barely campaigned. She didn't need to campaign because they were going to steal it. And then they prevented the cheat. And so that they didn't expect that.
Right. So they came up with a plan because they're like, okay, how are we going to, they sit down, like they've done all these elections before, right? And that's why the Stefan Halper guy, who they hired, he's a CIA guy, but he's also a very old political guy. So he, for example, was involved famously in DebateGate, where he stole Carter. So he worked for Bush, right? So he
was a Republican. He did all his dirty tricks for the Republicans for a long time.
Well, he calls himself Republican, but he's just basically a guy who just does anything for money, right? George Triggs guy.
Yeah.
So
he's just basically a whore.
Clinton's hired him because the problem that Hillary was facing is that she had an issue. So remember, she abruptly had to leave the State Department under Obama because of Benghazi.
And then she broke the law on classified information with her email server.
Right. And the prehistory to that, of course, is she was supposed to become president in 2008. And George Soros sponsored her. But she famously lost to Obama. And the deep state accepted Obama because reasons, right? But she was promised, so they made her Secretary of State and they effectively allowed her to run the whole of the foreign policy, which included a lot of bad things, right? Like, arms deals and whatever. And she ran them all off the book. And that's why she needed to have the secret server, because to avoid oversight, avoid future potential, liability, she and many other people, so Obama was on those emails under pseudonym, Biden's were involved, and she was giving people financial compensation. So she was running all this off the books deals, and that's what the arrangement they had with Obama, where he ran things internally, she ran things externally.
And with Sidney Blumenthal and the others who were running her
external. Blumenthal was effectively her sort of spy master, if you like. And they were running all these operations, which were designed to enrich the deep state people off the books with the help of the CIA, et cetera, and she couldn't afford to have them, oversight. That's why she needs to have
as well, Svetlana, because those off the books operations exposed the leftist, Islamist, globalist alliance that we see today, where the left is financing pro-Palestinian protests, etc., and the Islamic invasion of Western civilizations all around the globe because they want to destroy Western civilization. And these guys were in bed together then, and they didn't want that to be exposed.
The Clintons learned from the Bushes, because this is why it's a sort of, it's not Republicans versus Democrats thing, right? So they learned from Bushes how to make money from all this intelligence operations, arms deals, drugs deals, whatever they were doing. But it had to be off the books. That's why she needed to have the secret server. But then it was agreed that she was going to become the next president, because she was already owed. She felt she owed presidency, right?
After Obama,
After Obama. And actually, Joe Biden wanted to run. And this is something which people ask me about. I know it's not directly relevant to our case, but I might as well say it now because people are quite interested in this. Is this Hunter Biden computer, which was a proof of all his sins and the criminality of his family and their deviancy? It was something that Hillary originally used to stop Joe Biden running for the election in 16. That's what Devin Nunes said. So John Podesta, her campaign manager, went to Biden because Biden, as vice president, he was owed the presidency next, but Hillary said no. And then
it's mine.
If you run, it's going to come out, right? And that's what Devin Nunes says. It's amazing, right? And Podesta admits it. He said he had a conversation with Biden and Biden pulled out. And she also owned the DNC, remember, right? So she was just supposed to be easy. She's supposed to have this coronation. And her campaign effectively was run by two people. The actual election campaign was run by John Podesta, but the mastermind was a guy called Strobe Talbot. And Strobe Talbot is a close buddy of Bill Clinton. They were at college together. And Shop Talbot was he's like a CIA, Deep State Department guy, like you name it, right? But he's
also head of a think tank in Washington, D.C.
called the
Which,
Brookings
by the
Institute.
way, and married to a Russian woman, and was, obviously it was well positioned, right, to create the specter of the great Russian threat, because he's considered an old Russia expert.
You are so spot on. So he was the head of Brookings Institution, which is this Washington think tank, which is kind of like a CIA front.
Another receptacle for spies, by the way.
That's right. Like, it's a CIA front. But you know what the words you've just said. So believe it or not, in September, those exact words you've just said, like you're so good at analyzing these things. So you guess what happened. In September 2015, when they're plotting how Hillary is going to come back to power, they have a meeting. And I know that Durham people were looking into that because I found it online. I sent it to them, and it was really, really important to them as part of the conspiracy, because Hillary Clinton went to meet Shop Talbot, and she said, it's time to dust off your old Russian handbook, right? Because your old Russia hands.
Right there.
Right, September 2015. And that's how we know that the September 2015 marks the official start of the conspiracy, because it's 9 months before the election. So it's 11 months before the election. It's, they have everything planned out, and they specifically decided it's going to be Russia. And why is it going to be Russia that they're going to use as a way of getting Hillary, elected? Well, for two reasons. One is because it would have never worked against Democrats, this story, right? Because famously, remember Bill Clinton? When he was facing Bush in the debates, Stefan Halper was representing Bush at that point, right? This is the CIA dirty tricks guy. And he found out that Bill Clinton been to Soviet Union and some other stuff. And Bush tried to say, oh, you're connected with Russia, you're connected with Soviet Union, right?
And Democrats didn't care.
It didn't land. And what did Clinton famous say? You know the answer, you don't know the question yet, right? But he said, it's the economy, stupid. So I don't care about Russia, or whatever, right? All people care is about the economy. And he won the debate. And Clinton then realized that Stefan Halper is very good at this. And they hired him to get Hillary elected. And he realized Halper, as an old Republican guy who's been in the election fixing business for decades, right? Yeah. He realized that what's going to work on the Republican Party is Russia. Because also remember that Mitt Romney, during the debates of with Obama, said something like Russia. And Obama, because at that point, Obama was very close to Russia. They were doing a lot of joint things.
He did the whole Russia reset with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. She put the button on her desk and said, we're going to reset our relationship with Russia. And maybe that's because they were selling uranium.
But they were also genuinely had a lot of, they had a lot, since the Soviet Union collapsed, they had a lot of cooperation between Russia and New Russia, capitalist Russia, and America, to the point where a lot of people involved in Russiagate, originally they were actually in charge of cooperation. So the CIA and Russian intelligence services were all cooperating, right? So the guy who you'll hear a name in a moment, they'll become very important, who was called Trubnikov, who was the head of the SVR, was joined.
Who's called what?
Trubnikov, Vyacheslav Trubnikov. He was the head of Russian foreign intelligence services after the Soviet Union collapsed. And his counterpart was a man called John McLaughlin. And John McLaughlin is the name you probably know because he's the, thank God for the deep state guy. And he was the CIA director, acting CIA director. And he is known as the magician, right? Because he does tricks. And he's the guy who's one of the signatory of the the spy who lies, the Dirty 51. He was one of the signatories of the laptop letter, right? But he personally knew Trubnikov, who was the head of Russian SVR, and they worked together. But when it came to elect Hillary Clinton, they flipped it, right? So they made it as if Republicans were cooperating with Russia, right? And as if it's like the national security threat. So they chose Russia because, remember, as I said, Obama famously told Romney, because Romney was trying to say, oh, you're too close to Russia. And Obama said, like, the 8 is cold and they want their foreign policy back. Remember that? So he was accusing Republicans of being out of touch, that they're still stuck in a situation where they think Russia is like a communist state, but it's not, right? Like, communist collapse, it's not a capitalist country. So Obama was laughing at these accusations. So it would have never worked against Democrats, but it would work the party of Ronald Reagan to say that their candidate is a Russian stooge, that would have worked perfectly because Republicans would actually buy it and be upset about it. That's the first thing. And the second reason why they chose Russia is because General Flynn, who was at that point, so we're talking about September 2015 timeline, when Strobe Talbot meets with Hillary Clinton and they agree this plan to dirty up Republicans with Russia. At that point, General Flynn starts meeting with Republican candidates, not just with Donald Trump, but also with Ted Cruz, with every other Republican. So any Republican was going to be dirtied up with Russia because that was the conspiracy. And General Flynn used to work for Barack Obama as the head of Defense Intelligence Agency. And Barack Obama sent General Flynn to Moscow because they were cooperating on a bunch of issues. One of them was Boston Marathon bombing, which was done by Chechens, which was a huge problem for Obama. And so Russia had experience of fighting terrorism in Chechnya. So General Flynn went to discuss that to Russia because Obama sent him. And they had cooperation about, non-proliferation of the nuclear weapons. Then one of the Obama legacy, they wanted to leave Afghanistan. And Russia obviously had experience in Afghanistan.
And their neighbors,
Right. Then there was Syria. There was a bunch of things. So General Flynn was building a relationship with Russia, not because he likes Russia or hates Russia, right? He was just doing what was, he considered to be good for America,
as
right?
Which is to have Defense Intelligence Agency. That is your job.
Right. And specifically also, the idea was that they wanted to team up with Russia against China because they were worried that China was going to otherwise, become close to Russia, right? And
which was already happening, yes.
We know that because the same people we're talking about, like Stefan Halper, like Richard Dielaf, who's the head of British intelligence, like the other people operating CIA, MI6, which is British intelligence people operating out of Cambridge, at that point they were super pro-Russian, because they felt they were advising Obama on how to, make the relationship better. And that is why they had this Trubnikov guy who was the head of Russian intelligence formerly, but he became the guy who was doing all the peace talks and non-nuclear talks, etc. He was meeting with this Cambridge lot. And John McLaughlin, the CIA guy, he was meeting with all these people, right? And then they flip, because when they decide to activate this Russia story, and they activate it for two reasons. One is because they will land with the Republicans, and they're all Russia hands, the Democrat guys. And the second thing is because General Flynn had dealings with Russia, and he was going to become very important Republican person. He was even a vice presidential candidate at some point, etc. And because he been to Russia, communicated with Russia, they could flip it, right, and make it look like he's some sort of Russian, asset, right? That he somehow.
Just to recap, Svetlana, because it's hard for people who are not as familiar with all the different names and everything that's going on, is basically what we're talking about here is Hillary Clinton has been promised the presidency after losing to Barack Obama, and now they have to find a way to get her in office. The Clinton people hire a Republican dirty trickster by the name of Stefan Halper, who is also a CIA asset. And they hire him because they know how experienced he is at this. They also have Strobe Talbot in their corner, who is an old Russia hand. And they drag out the old enemy. They know that this is going to be, it's not going to work with Democrats, but it works very well with Republicans. And so they can use it against the Republican. And they're looking at all the candidates, right, in this 2016 election cycle. And they see, something which no one really expected, which was Donald Trump pulling ahead of everybody. But what happens at this time is that after a year of the Trump campaign reaching out to General Flynn, who is now forced out of the Defense Intelligence Agency under Obama, and he is now a free agent. And what happens is, as you said, he was meeting with a lot of different Republican candidates, but the Trump campaign was very serious about getting General Flynn. I know because I know General Flynn both professionally and personally for more than 20 years. And I was talking to him at the time, and he was telling me they were reaching out. But he said, I'm not doing this if people are not serious. And then after a year, they convinced him that they were very serious. He went down and met with Trump, and he realized, wow, this is the guy. He said to me, this guy is going to win. And Honestly, I thought he was nuts when he said it. There's no way. But I was wrong. And I was wrong in part because the media machine was telling us all this stuff. And I didn't quite realize at the time the depth of the deception and dishonesty. So there was a major operation against President Trump by the Clinton campaign, using people who were known CIA assets like Stefan Halper, and who had switched sides from the Republican side and was using his knowledge to help the Democrats now. And Michael Flynn was a big problem for all of them because he was known when he was running the Defense Intelligence Agency, and before that in his role in the military. He was a 3-star general with a lot of credibility, both on the battlefield from at the warfighting level all the way to the top. But where he made enemies was that he wouldn't lie. He wouldn't falsify intelligence. He wouldn't alter intelligence. He wouldn't bow to the deep state. And what he was doing is he was telling the truth when they were lying. So when Obama was lying about Islamic extremism, Al-Qaeda being on the run, General Flynn was going before Congress and he was testifying. They're taking territory across Iraq, ISIS, for example, and they're going to take more territory. And this contradicted what Obama had said on 60 Minutes, that ISIS was the JV team. Right? And so what was happening is that General Flynn was forced out of the Defense Intelligence Agency because he made it difficult for the CIA to lie to the American people, because he was another arm of intelligence that was not under their control.
And that's, of course, John Brennan, right? Sorry, just to interrupt. John Brennan CIA, and of course, Jim Clapper, who was at that point General Flynn's boss as well, as the Director of National Intelligence. So the people we're going to talk about later, they have history.
Brennan, Obama wanted General Flynn to falsify intelligence and lie under oath when he testified before the Intelligence Committee publicly and behind closed doors, and he refused to do it. And they forced him out as a result. So when General Flynn joins the Trump campaign, boy, they really didn't like that, and they needed to have something against him, and they needed to have something against Trump. And that's when they created this fake story about Russia, drawing on other things in the past.
That's correct. And I think this is a great summary. And just to sort of start, so what we've been talking about at the moment, and we've spent some time on it, is because we're talking about the origins. It's how they came up with the plan. And I can tell you from personal experience, as somebody who's a witness to the origins, so I'm sort of like patient zero, I suppose, or ground zero to all of this, is that in summer, autumn 2015, so this is when Donald Trump announced his candidacy, and this is when General Flynn started meeting with the Republican candidates. A completely unknown person, so I was a graduate student and a teacher at Cambridge University, an author, and my specialty is 1930s, specifically the origins of the Soviet intelligence, the Stalin, Second World War, things like that, right? And so I have zero.
And you are Russian, but you're living in the UK, and you're
So I immigrated. So I was born actually in Soviet Union, strictly speaking, but what is now Russia, and I immigrated to the United Kingdom as a teenager. And I became a British citizen, and I was fortunate enough to be able to get into Cambridge University, which is one of the top 3 universities in the world. And actually, English was my second language, so I don't know how I got in, but I did, and it was very, very lucky for me. I thought
that's
right. And my professor. So somebody I've known since I was 18, Professor Christopher Andrew, is going to actually become quite an important person in all of this because he was the chair of our history faculty. And so what happened is I was writing my PhD under my Professor Christopher Andrew. And Christopher Andrew was good friends with somebody called Richard Deloff, who is the head of British MI6, they call it, which is British version of the CIA. And he was also friends with Stefan Halper. This is the guy that we call, the spy. And he was masquerading as a professor in Cambridge also. So he's an American citizen, but he was hanging out in Cambridge University, pretending that he's this professor, using it as a cover. Because what we now know is they were running European operations out of Cambridge University. They were using university as a cover, and that's where they run because they also, I think we discussed last time, there's also NATO base military base called Molesworth, 40 minutes from Cambridge University, where a lot of DIA and CIA people are stationed, right? And
Svetlana, I just want to be very clear of what we're talking about. So you have a professor there, Professor Christopher Andrew. He becomes a very close friend of yours, and as far as you know, he's just a professor. Then you have Sir Richard Dearlove, who was the former head of MI6, Britain's CIA, and he's also acting as a professor at Cambridge, right?
Right.
And then in addition to that, Stefan Halper, the dirty tricks guy from the CIA, right? He's also he has a cover at Cambridge University as a professor as well.
Because what they need is they need to be able. So from my perspective, if you remember, I I started Cambridge University when I was 18. So this is 98, right? We fast forward into 2015. So when I, of course, entered Cambridge University, met head of the history faculty, I studied history, BA, bachelor degree, right? And master's and PhD, etc. So he's my university professor. That's all I knew back when I was a kid, right? And then obviously, mature student. Then much later on, so we're talking now 2014, 2015 period, right? 2016. My professor introduced me to Richard Dearlove, who was the head of MI6. He wasn't masquerading as someone, right? Like he was the head of MI6, but before, and he retired and became the head of one of the Cambridge colleges. But I thought it was like an honorary position, right? I thought he's a retired guy. They're all old guys, right? And then he also introduced me to this Cambridge professor, who is this American, Stefan Halper, and he actually went around telling people that he's CIA, right? But I didn't believe him. Maybe you'll show the pictures. Like, he's like really fat. He's like central casting CIA, right? Which is why I didn't believe him. Because he's like really fat, and his nickname, you can ask General Flynn, he's known as the Walrus, because he's really, really fat. And he's also like very sweaty. And he is an alcoholic. We know all that because later on it will come up in the documents. So he's like
he's going to lose a lot of weight in jail.
Hopefully. So he's a really, really nasty piece of work. But I thought he was just like this old guy. And, he gave money to university. That's how he obtained his position. So remember, I'm completely naive at that point. And he just went around like 10 stories. And he's father-in-law was somebody called Ray Klein, who's one of the original dirty CIA cowboys, they were called. So after Second World War, they were looking for something to do, like how to make money. And they started running all these operations. So his father-in-law is like the architect of the CIA kind of covert operations, like, do you remember we discussed some of them with arming, people in different countries, etc., etc. So basically doing loads of bad things, drugs, whatever. So that's his father-in-law. So he's basically, Halper is like part of the elite, CIA, family, I suppose, right? But, but to me, he was just like this fat, sweaty, ugly guy who was like really rude. So I paid zero attention to him. And he was a member of our group of, so I was invited. So my specialty was 1930s. And I was invited, would come every week. All the students would gather and we will present our findings, like our documents. So each week somebody will show, like, this is what I'm working on, this is my PhD. And sometimes former retired people will attend, right? Like Halper, like Dearlove. But we didn't know that these were live operations, right? We just thought as students that they were just like this retired, like old farts, pardon me, right? And so that was the picture as it was in 2015. And then strange things start happening to me. So I'm a complete unknown. Like, I don't know, 20 people read my research at that point, right? In life, including my family. And then this is summer 2015. We now know that's because General Flynn, Donald Trump are meeting up, right? But I don't know that at that point. I'm just a student. And Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, suddenly wants to have lunch with me. Right? Like, why? I mean, he's a friend of my professor, but why does he want to have lunch with me? And he starts talking to me about how much he likes Russia and that kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, fine. Right. And you will see soon the operation term for it is bump in, right? Because they, by surprise, bump into you, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is what I found out later.
Bumping.
And then they can report anything they like because they have a stamp that they had a meeting with you. And then they can say like, oh, she's a Russian spy or something. I later find out. But as far as I'm concerned, Richard Dearlove, he said, oh, I'm going to give some lecture about some Soviet stuff. Can you help me with that? Right? So, I met up with him. I helped him. I'm completely naive. Then it gets better. I give a presentation at a conference, and then I'm there with my husband and in Cambridge. And then my professor said, I want you to meet someone. And he kind of ushers my husband away for some reason, right? And this is my professor whom I've known since I was a kid. I know his family, his grandchildren, his dog. My husband's family knows him. We're all families, right? We were all in this quiet village in Cambridge.
You've been at Cambridge from 98 to 2015 at this point. So
right. I'm like institution there, right? And remember, I'm teaching students. My master's work is in the Cambridge Library. So within the Cambridge community, I'm quite a established, good person, right? Highly intelligent, they say, superstar, whatever, within the academic terms. But for very, very small group of people, right? Within my study group. Then suddenly he introduces me at this conference to this guy, and he says he's a fan of yours. This guy's John McLaughlin, the acting CIA director former John McLaughlin, who is a fan of me, right? And this is September 2015. And he ensures that we have some time together alone in a room without my husband, without anyone else present. And this guy starts telling me some stories about how he loves Russia, and he only just recently had lunch with this Russian KGB guys. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, I literally stand there nodding and kind of, how do I get out of this meeting? Because I want to go have dinner with my husband, right? This is what we call bump-ins, right? Like, so he bumps into me. And
he bumps you. And then he can report, he does a report saying what happened at that meeting, and you have no idea if anything he writes is true or not.
That's right. Then the next thing that happened is a gentleman called Nakasone, who you would know as recent head of the National Security Agency, also comes to Cambridge and wants to meet me. And they say, oh, we're interested in your research about 1930s, also want to come to me.
Wow.
And all these people suddenly, and when you look back into the calendar, know the precise dates are when Donald Trump becomes candidate, and when Hillary Clinton and Stroop Talbot and Jake Sullivan, who's a protege of Stroop Talbot and an aide to Hillary Clinton, they decide on this Russia plan and they hire Halper, right? So all these people suddenly start. And then the fourth person in the same time frame that wants to come and meet me is somebody called Alan Kohler. And he's an FBI guy and stationed in London. So I don't know if people know, but both the CIA and the FBI have what they call London Station. So this is like their representatives abroad.
Yes. And operates out of the U.S. Embassy typically, right?
Correct. Both the FBI and the CIA operate out. And so the official position of the FBI person in London is called legal attaché. And then he has an assistant called assistant legat. And it will become important later. And this Alan Kohler guy, who is the legat, so he's the chief representative of the FBI in London, responsible for liaising with British intelligence, also wants to hang with me in Cambridge. And he tells me a story that... Right? He tells me that he wants to leave the FBI, become a student in Cambridge. And can I help him? Because he wants to write a PhD. He's disillusioned with the FBI. Yeah. And just to fast forward a bit, I later tell the story to the Durham investigators when they're investigating this grand conspiracy. And they collapse laughing because he's the most ambitious guy who will later become assistant director of the FBI for counterintelligence. So he's like the most ambitious guy they had. It later transpires that he had that operation. Do you remember they caught the Russian spies, like Anna Chapman? He headed that whole operation, but he's also known, now I read up on him, right? Is that he's known as the part of the Hillary Clinton cleanup team, right? So whenever Hillary Clinton got into problems, like with bribes or whatever, he'd come and clean it up, right? But I didn't know that. My professor introduces me to this guy to help him to start a PhD at Cambridge University. I know it sounds funny and stupid that I didn't understand it then, but remember, I was living in a normal world, not in this alternative reality, in this world of shadows that these people operate. And he joins, because they have something called summer school in Cambridge, where all these intelligence guys were running the special thing, which we now know is a front organization. But back then it looked legitimate, where American students would come to Cambridge for summer and they study history or intelligence, and then they will get credits for their, for their
degrees. Right. Yeah. And these summer programs are just
as a student, not as a professor, but he joins as a student. And I remember making a joke, you should teach this stuff, right? Like, why are you joining? And he joined it as a cover to be next to me, right? And then we now
Wow,
know,
you
which I
had a
didn't realize
big
at the
fat
time,
target on your back.
when they now put in the brochure for that group, they now put it in an official brochure, that Gina Haspel, so this is the CIA director, Gina Haspel, who at that point was the head of London station, is also a member of the summer school group. And so is Mike Morrell, who is another CIA director, who is the one who organized the Hunter Biden laptop. So all these characters that we know about today.
Yeah, Mike Morrell was the deputy to Gina Haspel, who Trump put in at the CIA in his first term, which is just unbelievable because
but she's the member of this Cambridge group. So David Nunes, who's seen all the documents, he can't tell you what he's seen because they're classified, but he can talk about, open information. That's where I come in, right? Because David Nunes sees it from the classified perspective. And remember, Kash Patel worked for him. He was a chief investigator. So he saw all these documents from the classified stuff, right? Because they hidden all of them. But I'm experiencing them openly, right? Because they use
in
me.
real time.
Right. And why are they using me? Well, I was born in Russia. And I'm a woman. But most importantly, and this is something which is going to become very important very soon, so at the moment we're talking September 2015 when they officially kick off the Russiagate conspiracy. But a year previously to that, I happened to attend a dinner that I was invited to by Richard Dearlove and my professor Christopher Andrew and Stefan Halper to a dinner where present was the head then of the DIA under Obama, General Flynn. And the dinner, we've been through all the details, was completely innocent. There was a large group of people, and I was never alone with him. We only met once, and he was visiting Cambridge.
And just to be clear, Svetlana, so a year before all these people descend on you, you are out of the blue invited to this dinner with the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency in the United States of America, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. Right. And you have no connection to any of this. You don't understand why you're being invited to this dinner. In
fact, I didn't want to go. Mm-hmm.
Right. Weren't you pregnant at the time?
No, I wasn't pregnant. So I was pregnant at the time of Russiagate. In 14, I wasn't, but I was with my husband. So he actually accompanied me to the dinner and picked me up for the dinner, which is why then it would later become a problem for them.
And he took you there and then he took you home. And instead, they fabricated this story that at that dinner, you absconded with General Flynn to London and had a fiery affair with him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
when in
that's
fact
the thing.
You left with your husband and went home.
Right. So this is what we know now. But remember that Alan Kohler, so this is the guy who then later on comes to see me in 15.
This is the FBI guy out of the embassy in London.
We now know that he was running... So all the Stefan Halper was, CIA and dirty tricks guy for the Clintons, but, they have many jobs. But he was also an FBI informer, CHS, they call him confidential human source, a paid, FBI informer. He was on their books. So Alan Kohler was responsible for him. But Alan Kohler was responsible also for Christopher Steele, who you heard about because of the Steele dossier against Trump. And Christopher Steele was on the books of the FBI. We have official documents, and Alan Kohler's deputy, assistant legate, signed off the payments to Christopher Steele, and he's been on their books since 2014, right?
So that is such a critically important piece of information. I just want to make sure that everybody understands it. So you have the U.S. Embassy in London, the head legal representative, law enforcement representative, the legate is Alan Kohler. And he has two informants on his books. One is Stefan Halper and one is Christopher Steele. Christopher Steele is British, Stefan Halper is American.
But also, I think he also has British citizenship, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and he has British citizenship. And so Halper has done work for all kinds of people, but he's on the payroll of the CIA and he's on the payroll of the FBI. Christopher Steele is on the payroll of the FBI, and the two people who are the main source of everything that comes later.
Everything.
The Steele dossier and the Crossfire Hurricane, all that investigation. The two sources responsible for everything on Russiagate are Stefan Halper and Christopher Steele, both who are on the payroll of the CIA and the FBI.
That's right. And we obviously, at the moment, because we're focusing on what happened to President Trump, but it looks like the dinner that I got invited to by Richard Dearlove, who's the boss of Christopher Steele, remember, at MI6 and close friend.
Yes, let's not forget that Christopher Steele also works for Richard Dearlove at MI6. So he's a British spy for Dearlove, and he's on the payroll of the FBI and the CIA. And this is before any of this happens with Russiagate, right? This is years before. So they all know each other. So what happens when Russiagate breaks and we hear about the Steele dossier and they say what a respected spy he is, what they don't tell you is this cleanup guy for the Clintons, Alan Kohler, right?
You got
it. That Steele was his informant. And not to confuse people, but later, just so you know, later, Kohler is the FBI guy who signs off on the Mar-A-Lago raid.
So this is exactly. Yeah. And I was so shocked when I read it in the news that the same guy who wanted to, remember, this is the guy who wanted to do PhD in Cambridge, right?
Yeah, this is the guy that comes director. And says, now I want to be a student.
And remember, at the point that, we'll come back and explain it later, but just to show you what it's like to be on the receiving end of this massive conspiracy, I tell Durham people, because, when I'm speaking to Durham people, I tell them, this is whom I know, this is this, and they're investigating this Cambridge group, right? Because they were doing the CIA operations against President Trump. And I mentioned to them, and I was, close acquaintance with Alan Kohler. And they initially didn't believe me. Then they went, come back, check the files, come back. It's in the files that we met, right? And because what happens is they hide everything, right? So they hid my files. And this is what Kash Patel talks about, burn bags and prohibits access folders. So any information they don't want people to find out. So I tell Durham people that. Then they're able to go find the files. And
find where it is, yeah.
And then I tell them that this guy, they were like, how do you know him? I'm like, well, he randomly came to Cambridge and he wanted to abandon the FBI and become a PhD student in Cambridge. I mean, they were laughing because they're very serious people, right? Like, these are professional investigators, prosecutors, 30 years at the FBI, very hardcore people, very serious. This is the first and only time I heard them laugh so hard because the one thing that Kohler was known for, he wanted to become director for the FBI, right? He's like super,
right. He was never retiring and going to teach anything anywhere. Yeah, that was a total lie.
Exactly. And I feel like an idiot now, but back then, I took him to I have photographs with him. I took him to the archive, Churchill archive. I was one of my jobs was I was helping, I was an archivist, dealing with the documents so Churchill left a big archive, right? So we have all the photographs, him holding the Churchill papers, etc., which is why I'm so dangerous to them, right? Because I have all of this stuff documented, because they had to leave.
Because you know who the Cambridge group is. You know who this group of American and British spies and traitors are, and you have been a witness to the building of their conspiracy. Because just to remind people, so this is 2015 when all these people are coming to you, but a year before that, out of nowhere, Sir Richard Dearlove invites you, he and your professor, Chris Andrew, invite you to this dinner at Pembroke House in Cambridge, right, which was Dearlove's, that's what he was in charge of, and they invite you to this dinner, and what happens there? Because they accuse you of having an affair with General Flynn, none of which is true. And why did they do that? They were trying to get rid of Flynn at the time because he was, for all the reasons we discussed, he was an inconvenience to Obama and all the others because he wouldn't alter intelligence and he wouldn't bow to Brennan, who was head of the CIA. He wouldn't carry the false narrative that they were pushing. And so they had to get rid of Flynn. And they set Flynn up by saying that he had an affair with you. However, what happens, and this is in 2014, a year before the Trump campaign gets underway and all the rest of it, what happens is that other witnesses at the dinner say, that's nonsense, this didn't happen.
And that's what David Nunes, so this is his key point, right? And he actually gave the interview to Dan Bongino before Dan Bongino became CIA director, FBI deputy director. And David Nunes, because I never knew, right, because, I'm a sensible person, as you know, I'm an academic, I'm a historian, I'm a researcher. So if I don't have documentary proof for something, I don't say stuff, right? You've noticed that, which is also, I'm so dangerous to them, right? Because everything I say is documented, right? Whatever it is I say. So I never actually knew whether that dinner was a setup, right? Because it was strange that they invited a simple student to this very, very important dinner with the head of Defense Intelligence Agency. And they, I was sat next to Richard Dearlove, who is the head of MI6, right? It was bizarre. And they really wanted me to come. They really insisted. And I didn't want to go because, I have other things in life with respect, right? I didn't even know the existence of the CIA. I mean, I'm sure, okay, it's military intelligence, right? But I heard of the CIA, of course, of the FBI. But, I'm a British girl in Cambridge, right? Doing like some obscure, research, right?
Obscure studies in 1930s Russia.
Right. So the last thing I need in my life is to spend dinner with this old man, like Derlov, like even my own professor, right? And some guy from America. Like, it's not my thing, right? It's not my research interest. I would rather spend the evening with my husband, right? Or do my work, or I had to mark up the papers because I'm teaching as well at Cambridge, right? And I have so many students, I have so many essays to mark up, right? Like, it's all, I'm a serious person, right? And they drag me into this dinner, and my professor insists, and there's nothing, like, you can't, he's your boss, right? Like, you can't just, like, not come. But I was sitting there, frankly, half asleep because I've been marking essays all the nights before as well, and I had to do all the supervisions. And so the dinner went like absolutely fine, but I was like sat very far away from General Flynn. I was always accompanied. He was always accompanied. He left first with his people, with his, I think it's called military attaché, right? I assume the formal word is for the people who accompanied the Defense Intelligence head.
Aid, yeah.
Right. And then I left with my husband. And so, David Nunes said that he, back in 2014, because I didn't know whether this dinner was a setup or not, but David Nunes said that Brennan hated Flynn, and that that whole thing was a setup to get rid of him, right? And he's seen the document, so obviously I can't tell you from my perspective because nobody told me they set me up, right? But we know that that's the opinion of David Nunes, and he knows what he's talking about. So, one of the things I think we discussed last time around is there's a very famous book by John Le Carré, who is a former British spy. It's called
a fictional writer.
Right. And he wrote a book which was made into a very good film you should watch with Richard Burton called The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. And there they have a MI6 intelligence person, one of their agents, and they need him to go on an operation, but they burn him. He doesn't realize that, right? Like they screw him. And what they do is they set him up to meet this woman, but he doesn't know they set him up. So he has to leave the MI6. He gets a job in the library. She works in the library. They meet up by accident, or so they think. And the reason why they need to meet up is because she's a communist. She's a British communist. And then they send this agent behind the Berlin Wall, right? And he needs to do some operations. And then they bring the woman in and they blow up the whole operation because they need to get one of their spies out. Like, long story, you should read the book. But the bottom line is, in this story, the woman finds out that this was a trick against them. And she said, but how could they have known this? Like, how did they know that we would, fall in love, right? Like, they can't control, who they, and he says very clearly, he said, the operation did not depend on this. Right? He said all they had to do is put us in the same room together. Then they can report whatever it is they wanted. And this is in the book, right? It's written down in one of the most famous books. Yes. And they said all we had to do is for you to be young and pretty. And okay, maybe I'm not super pretty, but I was like one girl in the room, right? So it was enough. So all we needed is for you to be young and pretty, and for us to be in the same room. And then they can write up love or maybe infatuation or anything they like in the report because it's their report. So we now know, and Dear Love knows this guy, right? Le Carré, right? So it's a standard, can you imagine my life has been turned upside down, but actually this sheer realization is just a standard MI6 operation. It's just what they do. Right?
It's a standard tactic. Get two people in the same place, and then you can make it look like whatever you want it to look like.
And remember, I think you made this really important point before. Who are the people saying those things? Former head of MI6, highly respected Sir Richard Dillov. He's a knight, knighted by the Queen, right? Chair of history faculty, emeritus professor Christopher Andrew, who are saying these things, right? These lies. Then, of course, John McLaughlin. This is the guy, as I told you, he later meets me. Acting director of the CIA, Acting director of the CIA. Why would they lie, right? Like, it looks, and I'm just some girl. So they put this picture of these characters of respectability, these academics, the civil servants, right? These high figures in intelligence. And And it's not even their word against mine, because I never even get to see the files, because I don't even know
nobody asks you. You don't get a chance to give your word. It's all done behind your back. So basically, they set up General Flynn. They falsely accuse him of having an affair with you. It fails because because eyewitnesses disprove it. However, I don't want to get into this now because it's too much to the side. And maybe they used that to help force General Flynn to resign from the DIA. Maybe they didn't. Whatever it may have played a role.
So the opinion of David Nunes, and as I said, it's a different story,
yes,
but it's important for this purpose.
I don't want to get into that, though.
He used the word that Brennan, who hated General Flynn, railroaded General Flynn out of the DIA using this affair
100%.
Story. But then what happens, it now goes into the FBI files and sits there, right? The story that Flynn had an affair with, and remember, they don't even have to say they had an affair. They might have had an affair, and now we need to start the investigation.
We have credible reporting that Flynn might have had an affair with a Russian.
By a confidential human source who is a reliable informant. They always say that the reliable informant. So this Stefan Halper who lied. So Stefan Halper wasn't even at the dinner, but he said...
Wait. So you're bearing the lead there. You're just rushing past it because you find out years later who the source was, who said that you had an affair. But before we get into all of that, let's go back to 2015. It's a year after this dinner. You know nothing about any accusations.
Right.
You've never heard about any of that. You have all these people, all these high-level people coming to seek you out at Cambridge. And then what happens?
The next thing that happens is, obviously it's not happening to me, but you will see how I'm connected to this in a second, is General Flynn. So he's been meeting with many Republican candidates, including Donald Trump. And then he's sent to Moscow on a mission in December 2015. So although he's a retired DIA person, but he kept his security clearance. And the Defense Intelligence Agency sent him on a mission to Moscow. And the cover for the mission, and he's attending some dinner with a company called Russia Today, which is a Russian TV state channel. And he sits famously, there's loads of photographs at a dinner next to Putin at this anniversary of this gala dinner. But in fact, we now know from documents that Senator Grassley has released that the head of the DIA, so the successor of General Flynn, General Stewart, he sent him to Moscow to obtain intelligence, because at that point they were doing behind the scenes communications. And I think you're much better than me at explaining how those back channels work.
Well, you're exactly right. So at the time, when all of this breaks into the news, they used this trip to Russia that General Flynn took after he retired from the Defense Intelligence Agency or was forced out. They used this trip as evidence that Flynn has this special relationship with Russia, i.e. that he's a Russian asset, that he's, a traitor who's betraying his country and so on and so on. But what they don't tell you is two important things. One is that when you have worked at that level, the highest levels of the U.S. government on Russia programs, for example, or Iran or North Korea or whatever it happens to be, there is a moratorium on you being able to visit those countries because of what you know. It's a national security risk. And so before somebody like General Flynn can even think about stepping foot in one of those countries, he has to get permission from the U.S. government. In this case, he's actually working with the DA, but we don't know any of this. And what they don't tell the public is the visit is approved by the U.S. government. It's fully reported to them.
And he gets given, so for this declassified documents, which only now we know because we didn't have that at the time, is he gets what is called defensive briefing before he goes. And then he debriefs them when he comes back.
Yes, and that is, the general public only knows that now because documents are, have been released. So we have the evidence. But anyone in the intelligence community, or if you're connected, if you know how the intelligence community works, this is the same process for everyone. This is the same process for my husband because he worked in intelligence. He's wasn't allowed to travel to certain countries for 25 years after he retired. So it's the same thing. So if you have,
because of course when you leave sorry to interrupt. When you leave an organization like the CIA, like the DIA, okay, you leave all the documents behind, but they can't erase your brain. They can't erase what you know. And so what happens is that they have, General Flynn had presidential level clearance, they call it. So he, for example, would read as the head of the DIA when he worked for Obama, the briefings that every day they will, every week rather, every day, they will prepare for the president. And he had, I think what you explained is this TSSCI clearance, even after he retired.
Well, he had higher than TSSCI. He had a Q clearance, I'm sure. But the point is that there are normal standard procedures for people who work at those levels. They cannot just take off to Russia without having the trip approved, without being monitored. They know that they are spied every single moment that they're gone. Every part of their trip is monitored. And when they come back, they give a full defensive briefing. So that was one thing that the general public didn't know.
But they expect the general public not to know that. Exactly.
They know. They count on the fact that most people don't know it. And so they make it look, they say, oh, how could he do this? And they make it appear to be one way. And it's all a lie. They're taking something that they know was actually approved by the U.S. government. And then on top of that, what you point out is that later it was documents revealed that not only did General Flynn do all of those things which are required and expected of him by law, but he was actually sent to Russia by Vince Stewart, who replaced him as head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So he was actually still working for the U.S. government. So,
but he couldn't tell it to anyone, not to you, not to his brother, not to general audience, because it's classified. So they can say anything they like about you, and you
say
can't
whatever they want
because it's classified.
And then all the political operatives masquerading as journalists that they have across the media, they love to take this, and then, of course, they're going to run it at the Washington Post, and wherever else.
And that's exactly what happens. So yes. I obviously don't know that General Flynn. So remember, I met General Flynn once in 2014. We had some further correspondence at the request of my professor, Professor Christopher Andrew, to do with our joint work between the Defense Intelligence Agency and Cambridge University, because they were going to sponsor some of our research, etc. But other than that, I never met him. And of course, after he left the DIA, the contact pretty much dried out. And then
of course, that's another element in this setup, right, Svetlana? That's the equivalent of a bump, because what they're doing is having you maintain contact so they can say you met General Flynn at this dinner, and then you continue to communicate with him. But of course, that's set up by your professor, who's also a spy.
Right. And this is your friend, this is your mentor. He said, oh, Svetlana, why don't you write an email to General Flynn and invite him to come to an event in, our future event? Or why don't you send him this document? He would be very interested. And, again, I know it sounds naive now with everything we know, but put yourself in my shoes as a regular student who's listened to what their professor is telling them to do and has no idea. And also, again, I know I keep saying that, but these guys are old, right? Like, not only did I not understand all this like secret shadowy world, but also it's like my professor, right? He has a heart, pacemaker, right?
He seem helpless.
Yes, I had to help him with his pacemaker stopped working because his electricity went out and it's connected up to the internet. I would I know his grandchildren, right? I know his wife.
I just don't think that you're being set up. And when we think of a spy, we think of James Bond. We don't think of some old man with a pacemaker, right?
And that's why they're so good. And that's what I should have realized. This is a very interesting point you raised. I know it's a bit by the by, but it's a good lesson for our audiences. Is one of the things he actually taught us. So my professor, Christopher Andrew, he was a head of history faculty. And one of the courses he ran is history of intelligence, which is how I became part of the seminar. It was one of our interesting courses at Cambridge. So they would start with, Second World War, code breaking, Bletchley Park, and things like that. Cambridge spies, can feel with people like that. And one of the things he told us is that British intelligence, one of their best operatives was disabled elderly woman, and they would send her, I don't know if it's a true story or whether they were just saying it, but they would send her abroad, and people would talk around her freely, and she was able to collect information because she was disabled, she was in a wheelchair and old. So nobody thought she's a master spy, nobody thought she's like a James Bond spy, so they were very strict around her. And that's what I felt.
Same with Tucker Carlson's father in the CIA, by the way.
Sorry?
Same with Tucker Carlson's father in the CIA.
Interesting. So to fast forward back to this, so General Flynn now is about to become, he then officially becomes a member of the Trump campaign early 2016. And the moment he becomes a member of the Trump team, unknown to me, but I don't know what's happened with General Flynn on that side of the Atlantic. But on this side of the Atlantic in Britain, I receive a strange invitation from my professor, Professor Christopher Range, who says that me and my husband should come to his home and his wife is going to cook dinner for the Halpers. So by the way, just aside, all the spies, they always work husband and wife, right? So Halper has a wife who's a spy. I assume Professor Andrew's wife, I now probably thinks she's a spy. And he invites me to this dinner out of the blue. And I don't understand why he wants me to have dinner with the Halpers, because I have no connection. So Stefan Halper, this very fat guy, the walrus, sweaty, ugly guy who boasts around being CIA and being rich and whatever. I met him a few times because we were like within the same, university, but we had no connection. Maybe we exchanged like 2 words with each other, right? In the whole history of 5 years or something. Suddenly I have to attend this dinner with him, right? And I'm like, I don't want to attend dinner with this. Like, in general, I don't want to attend any dinners with anyone, right? I have my own life, but in particular with this guy, because I don't know he's this master spy. I just know that he's like really unattractive, horrible person. And why would I? So I just decline. And this is January 2016. I decline. And he gets very, very angry with me, my professor, to the point, and I couldn't understand at the time, that he breaks up my book contract. So the two of us were writing a book together. And it was very important for me as a first-time author. We had a very good contract from Norton Publishers and HarperCollins and all these guys. And he breaks the contract with me because he says it was very disrespectful for me not to attend this dinner. And I couldn't understand why. What we now know from reporting, which we didn't know before, is that actually somebody very important who's a source for this article when I gave an interview on Fox News describing all of this, they say nothing is a coincidence when it comes to Halper. So if Halper comes into your life, it's not just it's not a social event. There has to be an operation. And we now can link the fact that General Flynn becoming the person on the Trump campaign to the sudden appearance of Halper in my life. Because we also know that later on, he does the same thing with Carter Page, who is another Trump campaign advisor, to George Papadopoulos, to Paul Manafort, that he organizes these bombs, so these meetups, or something, the moment these people become part of the Trump campaign, right? So the most important Trump campaign advisor is General Flynn. And the plot that they had, we now know, is that he was going to wear a wire. How we know that? Because we have all these documents, how he will wire around Carter Page, how he will wire around George Papadopoulos, whom they flew to London to meet him, etc. So he was going to record me. And he was going to mention his connections with Russian intelligence, because remember, in the start of the conversation, we said that originally all these people work with Russians. So he is a personal friend of somebody called Vyacheslav Trubnikov, who used to be the former head of Russian intelligence. So in conversations with Carter Page and in conversations with Papadopoulos that they later used to, get the FISA, the illegal surveillance on the Trump campaign, Halper drops in things about his contacts with Russian intelligence, but to make it look like, oh, do you know Vyacheslav Trubnikov? Oh, I should introduce you. Why don't you come to Cambridge? And then they can twist it, right? In their search warrants or in their investigations or when they try and jail people, to say that they're connected to Russian intelligence, because he's what's the word? Marking the tape.
He's creating the connection.
He's painting.
Yes, he's creating the appearance of a connection, and then they claim a connection. And then they use that so that they can surveil you.
Right. So luckily, I don't go to that dinner, right? But I mean, they just found another way. I refused the dinner, but now we know the fact remains that they want to use this pre-existing fake story that they themselves manufactured about me and Jenna Flynn having an affair and me being a Russian spy in order to start the investigation of the Trump campaign. That's the plan.
And we know this because the documents that have been released from the FBI show, and from the Christopher Steele dossier show that that Stefan Halper told the FBI that you had an affair with General Flynn.
Right. And don't forget, you make a good point about Christopher Steele, because Christopher Steele always remember, because people heard of Christopher Steele, maybe they haven't heard of Halper because his name was being protected, but they work hand in glove because they had to create, I think it's called circular reporting, right? Where they are the two.
The appearance that there was more than one source when there wasn't.
To corroborate each other. So the way it works, it's called human intelligence under normal circumstances. If you receive as an intelligence service, you do an intercept, you listen to a phone call or you read a message, that's objective unless it's forged, right? So if somebody writes to somebody a message, that's objective information. So signals intelligence, old style. So it's anything to do with electronic or writing things down or voice. But then they have human intelligence, which is informer. Right, or snitches, depending on their preferred. Yeah, and these informants, right, because you have no way of if you don't have SIGINT, if you don't have a piece of paper, if you don't have a phone call, how do you know what these guys telling you is the truth? So the standard procedure within the FBI, within the CIA, is you have to have more than one source, right, to tell you the same thing, to corroborate. And also that source needs to be reliable. And how do they do it legally? How they assess whether the source is reliable or not? Perversely, the more money they pay to the source, the more reliable he's considered. So when they apply for the FISA, believe it or not, they applied for the FISA. So this is illegal surveillance based on Halper and Steele lies, which they coordinated. But they said that that Steele and Halper were reliable sources because they've been working for us for many years, right? Yeah. And also because we paid them all this money, right? So the more you as the taxpayer pay these people to lie, the more they can say to the FISA judge, which is of course their friend, as we now know, that these are really reliable sources because look how much we've been paying them, right? It's just complete. It's like it's like a circular reporting.
Self-licking ice cream cone kind of thing. Yeah. So they have their own people. They create these false lies. Steele turns his into a dossier, which we know was paid for by the Clinton campaign and Fusion GPS. They were running the payments through Mark Elias, the dirty lawyer.
And of course, and behind all of this is Soros, right? So Soros gives money to the Hillary campaign. So they always operate on this, and this is one of the challenges when I worked for the Durham inquiry they had, is that this is what we call dark money. So first of all, the money is like layered. So we know Reid Hoffman, the billionaire, was involved, right? This is the founder of LinkedIn. Huge anti-Trump guy. We know Soros.
First, by the way, to cancel me. Kick me off LinkedIn. Reid Hoffman, kick me off LinkedIn. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So we'll get to him. Yeah, we'll get him. And so what happens is we have these billionaires, right? Those billionaires, for all of their layered operations, they give money, dark money it's called, right? To the campaign, in this case, Hillary campaign. I mean, Soros admitted it. Other people didn't admit it, right? They sponsor Hillary campaign. Hillary then hires lawyers called, Perkins. And the reason why they hire these lawyers is nothing to do. Obviously, you don't need a lawyer, right, to run dirty tricks.
No, they hide the payments through the law firm.
Yes, and the operations, because it's called attorney-client privilege. So one of the problems Durham had for ages is theoretically your communications with your lawyer are covered under attorney
privilege.
Although, of course, when it comes to President Trump, they threw it out, and many other defendants. But when it comes to Hillary, it's sacred, right? So what that means is any emails or communications that Hillary has with Elias, right, are protected by this attorney-client privilege. And then Elias then goes, so they layer it up, right? It's like a money laundering, same thing. Elias then hires Fusion GPS. Who's Fusion GPS? This is Washington group of former Wall Street journalists who are actually, some of my, people I've spoken to. They said that the way they advertise their services is, they're journalists, but they also journalists that government, all this corrupt deep state people take seriously. So they can, if they work for you, they can get an investigation open on your competitor. Government investigation. So the way that works, and this is what Durham people explained to me, it's about injecting poison into the government system. So if you are on the approved list, because remember also why Bruce Orr works with Fusion GPS, etc. Bruce Orr is this DOJ guy. His wife Nellie Orr is a CIA person working for Brennan, but also working for Fusion GPS. So Fusion GPS had the special access to the government.
Bruce Orr was it was DOJ,
Yeah,
and his wife Nellie Orr was the Russian specialist.
They can inject the poison and it spreads around the system. So then Fusion GPS works with Christopher Steele. So Fusion GPS hires Christopher Steele. They create all these things, but secondly, remember what's Christopher Steele and what's Stefan Halper? They're official informers on the FBI files. They're classed as reliable. So their poison they inject also spreads through the government system, right? So the combination, then what happens is all of these people feed the FBI, but they also feed the media. Because what happens is the FBI then uses the media articles that their own people themselves created and coordinated between each other, right? In order to, they use that as evidence as well. So then it becomes circular. So for example, Halper Steele speaks to, let's say, to the Washington Post, their friend, Ignatius, for example, right? And the FBI uses this information as independent evidence of the same thing that they already have.
The journalist is pretending to be independent as well, by the way, and they're not.
And that's what Durham found. And so what did Durham found specifically, and this is what is going to be the central document in this conspiracy, because in order to have a conspiracy, back to where we started, is you need to have a group of people who are furthering the same plan. So they don't even have to meet. They don't even have to know each other. They might not, doesn't matter. They have to have a plan. Handily, because they're all lawyers, but also they need to cover their asses, pardon my French, they wrote it all down. They had a plan, which they put together back in 2015, as we discussed. And then they formalized in 2016. And the plan is so Hillary had these two problems. Well, she was a terrible candidate, which is by the by, but specifically she had two problems that were going to cost her the election. One is her health. So remember, they were hiding from the public, but everyone knew within, her campaign that, she was on drugs and she had terrible health problems, and she famously collapsed. I think it was 2 months before.
At that one event in New York City.
At 9/11, when they threw her in the truck and, covered up.
Yeah, when the agents were having to basically help her to the car because she could hardly walk.
And I think they were hiding, right? Like they were trying to hide with their bodies so the cameras couldn't take the picture, but they did. And the second problem they had is email problem. And what's the email problem is that after the Benghazi scandal, she resigned and she was subpoenaed by the Republicans to answer questions to the Benghazi committee. And on the day that she received the subpoena from the Benghazi committee, she deleted 33,000 emails from her email server.
The bleach scandal.
Right. And then...
She didn't just delete them, she destroyed them.
She destroyed them.
She had them destroyed, yes.
However, General Flynn, among other things, but the most important thing is he gave evidence against her in the Benghazi committee and also against all these other people. But also he went on TV and he said that Hillary should pull out of the campaign now because these emails will resurface, right? We'll find them effectively. And he, as a national security authority, is saying that she should go to jail. So do you remember this famous lock her up? That wasn't just a figure of speech.
The lock her up rally was real.
Not only she was going to lose the election, but it's the fact that the classified information that she possessed on the server could end up in the hands of a hostile foreign power, or in any hands, to be honest. Russia, China, Iran, or even domestically, or Israel, it doesn't matter, right? The point
broke every law of classification. First of all, she should have had two servers, the way it was stored, the way it was sent, the people who had access to it. I mean, there's no part of the law relating to classified information that she didn't break. And Comey coming up with this idea that you had to have intent to do it is nonsense. That's not what it says, and everybody knew it. But they were trapped because it was so obvious to anyone who'd ever had a security clearance or knew anything about it that she was guilty. And so he ended up doing this botched press conference where he laid out how guilty she was and then made up this thing about intent and said, we're letting her off the hook. And,
That's right. And what Flynn was saying, so she was claiming that like she didn't realize the letter C stands for classified. Okay. But
yeah, sure.
When you look at these things, not only she broke every rule, and you know that because you've, of course, interviewed many intelligence professionals, and it's also common sense, right?
And read the law.
You know, people, I mean, I think Adam Lovinger, for example, you know, so one of the people at the DIA, I think he got prosecuted for like, I think he was reading a work document on an airplane, and he was only supposed to read it in the office, and it wasn't even highly classified.
It's very strict, and it's very clear.
Yeah, so if they want to, like, they can get you for this classified stuff. And of course, if they don't, they don't. But what General Flynn was making the point of is if you have proof that the emails ended up with a foreign power, you go to jail. So we've now seen that John Bolton got raided, right? Trump's former national security advisor got raided because Iran hacked his emails. So you now have proof of harm. So whatever Comey said, if General Flynn could prove that these emails ended up with a foreign country, wasn't just she was not just going to lose election. She was going to jail and a bunch of other people. And they had to sort this problem out. Now Soros is calling them up. He's getting upset, her chief sponsor, because you know she already lost the election to Barack Obama.
In the media.
And they said, "Don't worry, we have a plan. Don't worry about it, right?
Don't worry, we have a plan. Here we go."
What is our plan? The plan consists of two things. And how we know about it? Because they wrote it down. The plan
which is in the documents. In fact, there's that letter, right? It's handwritten notes from John Brennan. That's one of the documents specifically that you're referring to, where he uses Stefan Halper's code name Mitch and says that Hillary, this is the Hillary plan, tied Trump to Russia.
That's right.
And all these documents are available on
That's
our
That's right. So we will make them available, hopefully within the video or online. But the specific, so what we're talking about is the outline of the plan, which I know about because I worked with the Durham investigation, but because also you would have seen it with your own eyes, you just didn't realize, right? Because every article you have seen, every investigation you heard about, it was actually implementing this plan. This is your conspiracy, right? This is where we're now getting closer to accountability because they wrote it down. What that shows, and I think John Radcliffe, who is a lawyer, I think he explained it really well, is when you have people sort of around the table or, you know, technically or not technically, they don't have to be present in the same room, but if they're all further in the same plan, which is to interfere at that point in the election, right? Yeah. To make sure that American people don't elect this president, they elect another president. That's a conspiracy, right?
Yes, it is.
So what is the conspiracy? They said that they literally wrote it down in order to distract. And the reason I keep repeating they wrote it down, because normally, you know, it's like stuff out of the movies, right? Normally you don't have evidence about these baddies, right? Normally you kind of know something bad happened, but how are you going to prove it? How are you going to catch them? Well,
but in this case, there is evidence.
They wrote it down. They wrote it down. What do they write down? An advisor to Hillary Clinton, called a foreign policy advisor called Julie Smith. She communicates with a man called, something Bendetti, we'll look him up. Anyway, a George Soros
Bernardo,
guy.
I think. Bernardo. This is the guy
Bernardo, that's
the
it.
deputy director of the Open Society Foundation for George Soros. So Julianne Smith was working for Hillary Clinton, and she is communicating with Bernardo, and basically they put these emails out in the Open Society Foundation that lay out the plan.
The plan. And what is the plan? They said that Hillary approved the following plan. Part one of the plan is to demonize President Trump by linking him to Putin and to say that Russia hacked the DNC and put it through the media, right? This demonization. And the second part of the plan is to start the FBI investigation of the Trump campaign. And the email specifically says, and then later after, you know, we prepare the media ground, the FBI will pour the oil on the fire. Now, if you read the whole Durham report, every single bit of it, pretty much, with regards to this, is all about what they did before and after this plan. So every single, so Elias meeting with Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele meeting with Elias, them all meeting with the journalists, them meeting with the FBI, Stefan Halper meeting with the FBI, Stefan Halper meeting with the media, all of those things, all the things you kind of know about, but you know all the individual bits. Alexander Downer going to the US Embassy. He goes to the US Embassy to meet to report George Papadopoulos, who he met months previously, but he is reporting that George Papadopoulos told him in a London bar whilst they were in the toilets. It's like bizarre story.
Dirt on Hillary Clinton.
That Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton, but then it got twisted. He said he only mentioned dirt. Then they said, oh, actually, what did they meant? That they're going to hack the DNC. But the meeting was in May, and he only goes to see. They say he went to see the FBI, but he doesn't go to see the FBI. He goes to the US Embassy in London, where Gina Haspel is, where the FBI guys are, basically this kind of nest, to see somebody called Elizabeth Dibble, who is a Hillary Clinton person. And she actually was involved in Benghazi, a bunch of other things. And he goes to see her on the day that Hillary Clinton formally approves the plan. And by approving, I mean financing of the plan, right? Because of course the plan, as we've been discussing in the first part of the program, has been in existence since September 2015, right? But now we have the formalization of the plan because we're now a few months before the election. So all this election dirty tricksters, they have the kind of like T-day and then they go minus, right? So if the election is in November, then you have to act in July. And somebody connected with the DOJ explained to me the reason why they had to also act in July, August, is because there is a formal DOJ break on how 60 days before the election, you cannot investigate a political candidate. So they had
because
to
it's regarded as election interference at that point.
Right. So you had to do everything before. So you had, right.
Yeah.
And so what that means is, for example, if you take like Washington Post, right, you will have a meeting between, let's say, Elias, who is a lawyer for Hillary Clinton, or Christopher Steele, or Stefan Halper, on the date around, and then the next day there will be an article to the point where some of them were even paid by Fusion GPS. So David Nunes discovered that Fusion GPS paid journalists and journalists paid Fusion GPS for the stories. So none of this was organic. So all this brainwashing they created, you know, the fog of war, right? They seeded the battlefield. Yeah. All this information that you guys lived in all this time hearing all this Russia stories, they were not organic. They were part of the Hillary plan. And so what Durham was...
Well, and what that's called, that tactic is called ambiguity increasing. So every time you turn around, they've thrown another thing out there. 1 minute it was, you know, the meeting in the tower, the Vigninsky Tower meeting. And then it's the, you know, the servers with Deutsche Bank. And then it's this thing. Then it's that thing. This Trump person went to Russia. This Trump person met with a Russian person. This Trump person had a meal in a Russian restaurant. I mean, they just, honestly, excuse my French, they throw as much shit in the air as they can. And so that they can use ambiguity to obscure the truth. They make it very difficult for the people on the receiving end of this information who have they're limited to what they're hearing and seeing. They don't have any of this context. They don't know about any of these meetings.
And they also trust, I think you covered quite well. They, you know, the Washington Post, the New York Times, you know, that generation, it grew up with this being your information. That is your newspaper of record, or MSNBC or CNN. That's where you get your news from.
In them. Yeah. And then you'd have no idea that not only, I mean, because you sort of think, well, where there's smoke, there's fire, you know, you don't think it can be completely and utterly made up. And yet it is. It's unbelievable.
It's meticulously documented. All of it is highly sophisticated. It's organized. That's why you need Fusion GPS, because Fusion GPS coordinated with the media partners. So we have emails between Fusion GPS and journalists, and Fusion GPS will tell them, you need to write this article, for example, about Carter Page or Michael Flynn, right? You need to write this article. Then the journalists from like Washington Post or anyone else, they send them the article back, they mark it up. It's really that, and Darren was exposing all of this, right? So it's all documented that all the articles you have seen, they're not organic. Now, why did you need those articles? So the plan needed two things, right? One is they had to have this Russian interference in the US election. That was the first bit, right? They had to manufacture that. That's why you had this DNC hack story and some other stories, right? Now, okay, bad enough if you take it at face value that Russia interfered, but candidate Trump can turn around and say, yeah, okay, they might not interfere, but that's nothing to do with me, right? So the second part they need to have active participation from the Trump campaign in this, what they created, this conspiracy with Russia. That Russia is trying to install Trump and people in the Trump campaign are helping it. So for that, they needed to create the contacts between Trump campaign advisors and Russians.
Yes.
But Russians in the position of Russian intelligence, right? So how did they create it? But they didn't, we know it didn't happen, but they need to create it. So how did they do it? So first they create the smoke story of Russian interference. And then the next is they put in the media and into the FBI, the story about the contact. So what happens is in parallel to each other, two confidential human sources for the FBI, Stefan Halper, Christopher Steele, go to the FBI at the same time and say, hey, I know that Carter Page, Trump advisor, met with this oil guy. I forgot his name. Basically, Sedition, the head of Russian oil. He's close to Putin. He's there for Russian intelligence, blah, blah, blah. And they report this. So both Steele reports this about Carter Page and Halper reports it about Halper.
And they're both lying.
They're both lying. Didn't happen. Carter Page said I didn't meet with Sedition. And we know that because, so Halper meets with Carter Page, and Carter Page, remember, this is CIA officer, but he's...
Yes, Carter Page was a graduate of the Naval Academy. He was a naval officer, and he was working for the FBI and the CIA. He's the one who the FBI lawyer removed from the CIA emails the evidence that he was actually on their payroll, so that they could take their application to the FISA court and get permission to spy on him.
Because the CIA sent Carter Page to Moscow. But the FBI said, with CIA help type thing, that the FBI said that he went to Moscow because he was working for Russian intelligence. But in fact, he was working for U.S. intelligence.
And
so
they knew
changed
it.
the
They
word
knew he was
not
working for U.S. intelligence, and they just lied.
So this lawyer at the FBI added the word he's not a CIA operative,
he
right?
took it out. Mm-hmm.
And then Judge Boasberg, who's now in the news a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
He let off that lawyer. So that lawyer who fabricated, actually forged information, lied to the court, defrauded the U.S. court.
Yes.
And
he
was supposed to go to jail. Kevin Kleinsmith. He was supposed to go to jail. The prosecution were asking for him. So this is one of the Durham cases. So they were asking.
And then the media ran cover and said, "Oh, he was low level and it wasn't important, and he wasn't doing the."
Judge Boasberg said he suffered enough and didn't give him any jail time. And in fact, they even he only gave him community service. And normally, it's unheard of, right, not to have jail time for forgery. He admitted he pled guilty. Right? They had all the evidence. And he was, by the way, he was writing this email saying, Viva la resistance. So he was like part of this like anti-Trump resistance group. Judge Boasberg. And this is why, I know that like, we kind of go backwards and forwards a bit, but it's very important for the listeners to understand that it's all ongoing. So everything they think is happening today is new. This is why I live in this alternative universe, right, to everyone else, because I've been looking at this for 10 years. So, you see Maggie Goodlander on the news organizing Sedition, but I know that she's the wife of Jake Sullivan, who's been organizing the Sedition from 17. So none of this is ancient history. Judge Boasberg, he's a resistance judge. He let off another resistance member. So this is part of this conspiracy. So whatever else he's doing, that he's part of this whole thing, right? So none of that, it's not about Russia, right? It's not about Ukraine. It's not about impeachment. It's not about Gen 6. It's not about Hunter Biden. It's all just one big conspiracy against the president of the United States that they don't like and they want to get rid of, right? And they go on and on and on. That's why we call it, continuing conspiracy. So back to what's happening in August 2016. So we're now getting very close to the documentary evidence of the conspiracy, which is that they all arrange that they all will go to the FBI at the same time and flood the zone with the media who works for them and in conjunction with them. And they kickstart the FBI investigation. So they inject this poison, right, into the government system. So what happens is, for example, Carter Page we're talking about is Halper and Steele both go to the FBI and say that on a trip to Moscow, he met with Sedition. and Sechin is a friend of Putin, and he's Russian intelligence, although, whatever. He's like a oil guy. Sechin said, and Halper meets with Kartpage, and Halper records the conversations because they need a recording in order to submit to court that they have all this evidence. Kartpage denies this on the tape. He says, but I didn't meet with the guy. And they twisted to say that he didn't deny. Then Halper introduces this idea that he knows, we have all the recordings, right? They've been released. So what I'm talking about is actual documents.
But just to make it clear for the audience, we only have the recordings later. When all of this is being reported in the media and Carter Page is not even given an opportunity to defend himself, they can say whatever they like. And they lie repeatedly. They tell the media he did this, he did that, he said this, he said that. And when the evidence comes out years later, nobody's connecting it. But what Carter Page is left with is a life and a reputation that is absolutely shattered.
We have an actual email that Durham found where the founder of Fusion GPS emails Tom Hamburger of the Washington Post and says, you must print a story about Carter Page in Moscow, because remember, this is in parallel. When something doesn't happen, right? So when an event happened, you will have all these people, maybe they don't remember things exactly, right? But when something doesn't happen, that's your conspiracy. Because if something didn't happen, why are people repeating the same story? Well, because they all agreed on that, right? So what's happening is on the same day that Christopher Steele goes to the FBI and say that my Moscow sources are telling me that Carter Page met. So he's pretending that he has his MI6 sources in Moscow, like a network, and his sources in the Kremlin are saying that Carter Page met with this guy, right? A lie, but he says that's from his source. Okay, that's one piece of information. Yeah. Then Halper says, I met with Carter Page. I met with Carter Page in Cambridge. We'll come back to that at this July conference. And he told me he came to this conference on the way from Moscow. And he told me he met with Sedition. The recording shows that he said no such thing, but it doesn't matter because the FBI wants to obtain surveillance. They want to investigate the Trump campaign and potentially, as insurance policy to jail him. So they put down he met with Sechin, right? Then we have Fusion GPS all on the same time frame. Glenn Simpson, the moment Hillary approves the plan, Glenn Simpson, founder of Fusion GPS, we have this, right? They write to Tom Hamburger of the Washington Post, put in the article that Carter Page met with Sechin. Tom Hamburger, although he's in the payroll of Fusion GPS, but he comes back and says, I've spoken to my sources. They say it's bullshit. They use the word bullshit. They say, well, investigate some more, right? Okay. So they can't put that he met with in Moscow with Sechin because his own Washington Post colleagues in Moscow say it's not possible because Sechin is a really important guy. He's head of one of the biggest oil companies in the world.
And they don't believe it.
Who's Carter Page?
So what happens is they own some of the journalists, but they don't own all of them. And they can't quite get away with this lie.
Well, because it's so bleeding obvious. So what happens is instead of putting the story that he met with Sechin, Hamburger puts the story that at the Cambridge conference, Carter Page made pro-Russian statements, right? And admitted to the guy who was present at the conference, which is the same Stefan Halper, who is part of this conspiracy group, that he met with all these important intelligence people in Moscow, right? So they just go around it.
And just to recap for people, because we're going back to the conference in Cambridge, what you're talking about is in the summer of 2016, they hold this conference where Stefan Halper is there, Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, your professor who's the spy.
Probably Christopher Steele, who works for Richard Dearlove. We don't know for sure because we don't have him on the program, but he works for Dearlove, right? So he probably was there. Then we have my professor, who is MI5. Then we have Stephen Shraggy, who is a CIA guy. And then we have Madeleine Albright. So Madeleine Albright, who is a proxy
over from the US, another Clinton person.
Right. And so
basically they have a conference where all these spies can meet and they set up Carter Page because they invite him and they have him come there on his way back from Moscow. And then of course they lie about, what he said at the conference. And he's never given a chance to defend himself.
And they even go so much as say that he approach Madeleine Albright, which he's invited to this, right? But they tried to make it look like he works for Russian intelligence and he was like trying to penetrate, the Hillary campaign by approaching Madeleine Albright. There's like an FBI report about that. That's like the degree. And then Alexander Downer, who is going to be the guy who's going to report George Papadopoulos and therefore start the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. He's also at that conference. It's so coordinated. It's ridiculous, right?
It's so coordinated.
And then
this is the thing, though, Svetlana, because I don't want to overwhelm people, right? I know that there's a series of events leading up to this, but basically where this takes us is that Christopher Steele and Fusion GPS and the Hillary campaign write this fake dossier. Then at the same time, the other so-called source, Stefan Halper, the other spy, he's going to the FBI. They, of course, are going to John McCain and all the other people that they have on both sides of the aisle who are corrupt. They use John McCain to take the Steele dossier to the FBI, supposedly because he's so concerned about what's in there, which is a complete lie as well. But
and at the same time, he's the confidential informant for the FBI. So he feeds the stuff into the media, but at the same time, he's reporting the same stuff secretly.
Yes. And so it's all this circular reporting that goes through the media, through the FBI, through the CIA.
Constantly.
And of course, and of course it's John Brennan, right, who makes sure that this Christopher Steele dossier is attached to a report on the 2000
which would be the next thing we'll get to, right? But it's all what we're looking at is origins, right? And then we're going to get to the point where it's going to end up within the intelligence community assessment. Indeed, the same story.
Yes, but I think that we have to, because it's a lot for people to digest. Yeah. So I think that the point of this is we started with John Brennan, right? We started with the fact that John Brennan is facing a grand jury, which is investigating the origins of the Russia collusion investigation. Right. And what we're showing is that at the FBI, now you can see all these spies, they come from the FBI, they come from the CIA, they come from, they use Cambridge as a cover, they all meet in London, right? They all meet and they're plotting with the Hillary campaign. There's lawyers involved. There's all these different people involved. But essentially what you have is
they're all furthering the same conspiracy. So what happens is that, back to John Brennan. So they organize this conference in Cambridge. Madeleine Albright flies to this conference and she's a Hillary proxy. She's about to introduce her at the DNC convention a couple of weeks later. And Halper and Dearlove and Steele, they all come up with this plan, they formalize this plan. And the plan, the Hillary Soros plan is to tie Trump to Russian intelligence in order to distract from her email scandal and to start the FBI investigation. Then, like clockwork, what happens is that Madeleine Albright is the boss of Julie Smith. And Julie Smith, that's why I keep going on about this document, because it's going to be the crucial document, hopefully, for the prosecutors, because I know it was a crucial document for the Durham prosecutors, which is the plan that they wrote down. So Madeleine Albright is a friend of Alexander Downer, and she is obviously Hillary proxy, but her protege, Julie Smith, sends an email to the Soros people saying, don't worry about the election. We're going to fix the election because what we're going to do is first we're going to basically they need to clear Hillary of this email scandal, no reasonable prosecutor, remember July. Then we're going to start the investigation on the Trump campaign and we're going to demonize them in the media. Right? Yes. John Brennan.
And this is part of the evidence that has been released now. That is public record that people can find on our website.
John Brennan takes this document about the Hillary Clinton plan because he receives a copy of it because Soros of Open Society emails are intercepted. Brennan knows about the plan because he put it together, but he's now worried that they're going to leak, right? That this information is going to leak, that all of this is not legitimate investigation, but it's a construct in order to help Hillary to win the election. And he meets with Barack Obama on the same day that he receives
the president at the time.
Who's president then. And we don't have the notes on it, but Durham is very specific that he meets with Obama secretly, he meets openly, but we don't have the notes, on the day that he receives the plan. And the next day, he goes to speak to Comey about his meeting with Obama. And Comey orders the opening of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation of the Trump campaign advisors, right? Then they have a second, this is July 31st. Right? 2016. Then on August 1, and then on the same then the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, the basis for opening it, an umbrella investigation into the Trump campaign, is the information that Alexander Downer provided about George Papadopoulos and dirt on Hillary. That is used to open an investigation. And this is part of the Hillary plan, right? And Obama approves it via Comey and Brennan. The next step is they open a general investigation, but not specific. They now have a second meeting. And now a bunch of people are present. And this is the document that, we're going to have hopefully within the screen or on the website. And so it takes place in the Oval Office on August 3. And back then, Director of National Intelligence Radcliffe declassified it, and now it's been used all the time, to prove the existence of this plan. We have Brennan's meeting notes. So present in the meeting are Barack Obama. This is August 3, 2016, right? A few months before the election. Yes. Barack Obama, Susan Rice, Jim Comey, John Brennan, and then we have John Brennan's own handwritten notes. And John Brennan tells Obama that now this information about Hillary plan is known, right? Because the emails have been intercepted. And the Hillary plan is to distract from her email server by tying Trump to Russian intelligence.
Yes.
Barack Obama, we have his response because it's in the Brennan's written note. And he asks for evidence of contacts between Trump campaign advisors and Russian intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Comey responds something. We don't know what. It's still redacted. Don't ask me why. I've been fighting to get it unredacted by the CIA. But there are 4 bullet points. But what we know, this is meeting on August 3. But then on August 10th, they open on 3 Trump advisors.
Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, and Paul Manafort.
And then on August 16th, they open on
General Flynn.
And so effectively, this is Obama ordering, to cut the long story short, and Brennan and Comey implementing the Hillary plan, the Hillary Soros plan, which is to create this contacts between Russian intelligence and the Trump advisors in order to fix the election. Effectively, Obama orders this, right? Now what happens is, but how do you open this investigation, right? Well, they open an investigation on Carter Page because he's been to Moscow and they say that he met with Sedition, They open an investigation on Manafort because whatever, because it's Manafort. He worked in Ukraine.
Well, because they look at Farah and they say they get him on all those
whatever. They open on Papadopoulos because of Downer.
Because of the meeting with Alexander Downer where he claimed Papadopoulos said that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton.
Right. Can't open on Flynn. Why can't they open on Flynn? Because Flynn is holding highest level security clearance called TSSCI, which just got renewed in April by the Obama administration in April 2016. Can't open on him, right? Because any contacts he had with Russia had to be legitimate, otherwise they wouldn't have renewed the clearance. What do? They need something. They need some sort of insurance. They need to make sure they're going to open on Flynn. So we literally have text messages between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, which Devin Nunes confirmed is about Halper, saying we need an insurance policy in case Trump wins. And the insurance policy is an open investigation on his closest, most important national security advisor, General Flynn. And the insurance policy is Halper. And Halper evidence against Flynn. So what happens is on August 10th, so this is a week after Obama ordered to open specifically on these 4 people, but the most important one is Flynn. Christopher Steele writes that he received information from his sources in Moscow that General Flynn attended this RT event. Remember the one that he attended in December 15 on orders of DIA?
Yes.
They twisted to say that General Flynn was recruited by Russians and paid for Russians at this event in December 2015. And I then got contacted later on to say I was the person who arranged for him to go to this event in Moscow and that I organized the payment for that. And Steele writes in his dossier, pretending that it's from Moscow sources, but in fact, they're working in parallel with Halper to say, this is August 10th, to say that that was Kremlin way of recruiting and compensating Flynn for his work. Because remember, they're creating the illusion of contacts between Trump campaign and Russia. This is August 10th. August 11th, Halper meets with FBI as an informant. He meets with his boss, not boss, handler at the FBI. I think actually Halper is his boss, in effect. And he recycles that stupid story saying that I had an affair with General Flynn and that he witnessed it. Now,
Yeah. And claiming to be at the dinner that he wasn't present at.
Right. He specifically says, and it's reflected in a document that I fought for years to get declassified. And then that's one of the documents that got raided. It says in the document that Halper witnessed that when Flynn was in his position with the DIA, he came to Cambridge University. He attended this event, this dinner, and that I surprised everyone. The woman, Svetlana Lokhova, surprised everyone because she suddenly latched on General Flynn and jumped into a taxi with him. And then they drove to a train station, and then they ended up in London and, basically had an affair. And that Lokhova was suspicious. Within the, on top it says counterintelligence investigation into Russia influence, right? Or on top of the 302. And that's an official document. It's written down, right?
Oh, yes.
Then even the corrupt FBI guys go like, hang on a second. So they go back. But remember, it's kind of long-winded, but now you see why we had to go through that dinner, because General Flynn was accompanied. And because they've already investigated back in 2014 and people who accompanied him said it's bullshit, right? Never happened.
Yes, and just so that people understand. So essentially what has happened here is that you have this meeting with Obama. There's 4 points in the documents, the records of that meeting that are redacted. But shortly after that meeting, investigations are initiated into 3 of those people. And then there's still General Flynn. And so in order to motivate this investigation into General Flynn, they bring back this old allegation from the dinner that was, years before, that had been completely debunked in the documents because first-hand eyewitnesses at the dinner said it didn't happen. But they bring it back. They lie about it.
And he swears that he was 302 is the same document. Remember, General Flynn was going to jail for lying to the FBI, except he didn't lie, based on this 302 that they wrote down. So this is an official, almost like sworn testimony. So Halper, under oath, effectively, tells law enforcement he witnessed it. Now, They go away, and as corrupt as they are, because this Crossfire Hurricane team is like really, really corrupt, led by Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Pientka, all these guys. So Pientka is on top of this document.
And Joe Pientka he's the FBI agent. That's who's working on the case. That's who he is.
And they come back the next day and say, hey, but so they need to come back to Halper the next day because they took it back and they realized they can't really open this investigation because it's a bit of a problem, right? That General Flynn was accompanied. And they asked Halper, hey, but wasn't he accompanied by, and Halper said, well,
because the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency doesn't rock around on his own. Yeah. So he's always got somebody with him, whether it's his aide
and
or...
had they lost the head of intelligence agency in a foreign country with a potential Russian spy, maybe they would have reported it back in 2014. And we're now in 2016, right?
You think? Yeah.
Yeah. And in
so the story
fact,
lacks credibility, basically. And the FBI agents come back and they ask Halper again, was there anybody with the general?
Yeah. And he's like, I don't remember. And it's everything like suddenly they don't remember. He doesn't remember the year it happened, right? He doesn't remember anything. Maybe not. But I can reconfirm to you, he says, she jumped in the taxi and they went to the train station. Also ridiculous on its face because how would they even know any of those things, right? And then, of course, the main thing.
The ridiculous part is that Halper wasn't at the dinner.
Halper wasn't at the dinner.
He didn't witness anything. So all of it is a lie.
But in any event, they take that and they take the Steele report that Flynn went to Russia today in Moscow and Russia recruited him there based on his Moscow sources on the 10th of August, and Halper report on the 11th of August. Again, they coordinate, right? They're both sitting in Cambridge.
Yes, and I just have to say this is very, very important for people to understand that John Brennan has access to all of the classified information. So he knows from the first report of Flynn supposedly having an affair with you that the eyewitnesses say it didn't happen. He knows that that's not true. So he knows when it resurfaces that it's still not true. He also knows that General Stewart at the DIA sent Flynn over there. He knows that they debriefed Flynn. He knows that they monitored Flynn every single minute that he was on the ground in Moscow. So they know perfectly well, same thing in Cambridge in England. They know that U.S. intelligence monitored him every single minute he was on the ground. So they know, the United States government, every single person involved in this, from the president to John Brennan to James Clapper, head of the DNI, and so Comey, they all know that every single part of this is a lie. And this, I think, is the critical ingredient for the audience, is that we might not know. Maybe even the FBI agent, he hasn't had time yet or gotten access yet to the classified stuff or whatever. Maybe you could make an argument that they're not 100% certain. But all of the key players in this, all of the puppet masters, they know 100% that it is a setup. And this is what the Brennan trial is really all about. Because the origins of this investigation are 100% false. And not only do they know what the classified information tells them, but they also know about all the context. They know Halper's working for them. They know Christopher Steele's working for them. They know the Clinton campaign is paying for this opposition research. They know that these journalists, Matt Rosenberg, the journalist from the Washington Post, is he Washington Post or New York Times? I can't remember.
New York Times.
He called you, right?
Yeah. And he was the one who told me that he received from his information from his sources, and he later admitted to me it was Halper and Steele, that I had an affair with General Flynn, and that I was the person who invited General Flynn to Moscow. And I've showed you those emails, we can post them, and that I also organized the payment by Russians to General Flynn. And that information is in the Steele dossier about the payment, and the Russia Today thing is manufactured by Steele, and information about the affairs manufactured by Halper. And then they give journalists these two stories, and they kind of cross-collaborate each other, but it's all a lie corroborated.
You told Matt Rosenberg that none of this was true, and he didn't care, did he?
Well, and this is the thing, they also, Matt Rosenberg, David Ignatius of the Washington Post, all these people, they all came to Cambridge or called people up. Everyone told them in Cambridge it was not true. They've investigated this. Remember, it would have been a big scandal in Cambridge. But it doesn't matter, because Rosenberg's defense was Brennan ordered me, right? I also heard from... so Brennan apparently ordered Rosenberg, this is New York Times. Then I heard from the woman from MSNBC who works with John Brennan, that they sent Halper. So remember, Halper is a CIA officer, operative, that they sent into the FBI. So what they do is they create all this stuff in London in 2015. They create all this story, and then they bring it in, because CIA cannot investigate or jail or officially surveil American citizens, let alone political campaign. But law enforcement can. And Brennan, in his testimony, openly admitted that he received information from his allies in Britain, i.e. Steele and Halper, that senior person on the Trump campaign, who they immediately, this is his congressional testimony I'm quoting, senior person on the Trump campaign, who his friend at Washington Post immediately names as Flynn, was compromised by Russia. And that it was a false flag operation, because Russians, I'm quoting his congressional testimony, Russians are very good at it, and General Flynn might have not, he stepped on this path of treasonous path, wittingly or unwittingly. Because Russians are so good at it, he might have not realized that effectively that I was not a Cambridge academic, but I was a Russian spy. And then he's very aware of how Russians run these operations. And then as it progressed, he became compromised, and then he became vulnerable to blackmail, because the story they constructed is that I had an affair, gave Flynn money, and then the Russians blackmailed Flynn into working with them, is the story, right? It's all fake. And then what happens is, in the Comey notes that we were talking about, it says the word Mitch on it. And on this 302, so this is the official FBI record of this lie.
Their investigative
receives a payment for this lie. We also have, these are the Crossfire Hurricane documents that President Trump declassified, we've been talking about. President Trump declassified that Mitch, Stefan Halper, is a codename Mitch, has received his payments for the FBI on the day that he told this lie. So they're paying him to lie.
And it's over. That document shows a payment of over $500,000. I mean, they paid this guy over $500,000 to lie, to set up the president.
But then he was also paid. Why is his code name Mitch? Because Comey, who gave the code name, knows he works for the CIA, because Mitch alludes to a fictional character called Mitch Rapp, who is a CIA operative, but he operates outside congressional oversight, and he gets paid, from a slush fund, CIA slush fund. And we know because of the evidence of a man called Adam Lovinger, who went to Senator Grassley, who worked at the Pentagon Office of the Net Assessment, that Halper also received $1 million from the Office of Net Assessment, which is supposedly for research, like security-related research. Yes, but in fact, he received those payments on the dates as he lied about General Flynn, as he lied about Carter Page. Right?
Yeah, which is why President Trump in his second term shut down the Office of Net Assessments at the Pentagon, because they knew that it was being used as a front for off-the-book dark money payments for CIA operations that are treasonous.
So what was President Trump exposing is the CIA operations created by Brennan. Then they bring it, so they offshore it, right, to avoid oversight, and the CIA runs it. And then they onshore it back into through the FBI.
And the Ukrainians, yeah.
Right. Then the next step in the conspiracy, right, it doesn't work because she's such a terrible candidate, so she loses the election, Hillary Clinton. But Obama doesn't, and Brennan, they're like, we don't care. Right? Like, we don't care about that. So what they then do, and so now President Trump formally appoints, after the election, General Flynn as a national security advisor. And then in December, they published 16, so this is 2 months after the election, they published a series of articles, specifically one where Halper is even on the record. And again, it's a standard CIA technique where you publish something abroad in an article, you're an operative publishes, and then you bring it to the US. So they published an article in December 2016, and this is when I'm 6 months pregnant. In the Financial Times, I get a call on a Saturday, and Financial Times is a serious financial publication. And on Saturdays, usually about culture and cinema. And on the front page, there's a very stern-looking Richard Dearlove. And the article says that him and Stefan Halper left the Cambridge seminar that I was telling you about because of its penetration of by Russian intelligence. And I collapsed laughing, right? Like, who, what? I don't know anything about it. That's the first time I find out.
And just to remind people, this is Sir Richard Dearlove, who's the former head of MI6, Britain's intelligence, CIA, basically, and who is retired and now head of Pembroke House at Cambridge. And of course, you said Dearlove and who?
Stefan Halper, on the record. The Cambridge has been, and that the Parliament is going to investigate.
Cambridge has been penetrated by Russian spies, which would be used, Svetlana.
And on the front, the first line, it says the seminar that's been attended by General Michael Flynn.
Of course.
The article is December 16th. He's just been appointed National Security Advisor. Remember, this is when Obama says to Trump, don't hire Flynn, but doesn't say why, but they make it look like he told them he's under investigation.
Don't go anywhere near General Flynn. He's dangerous.
Yeah, but when they leak this information, they say he told Trump he's under investigation for Russia contacts, but he didn't tell him that, right?
No.
So right? And then what happens is that it says in the first line that General Flynn attended the seminar recently. Well, it's December 2016, and he attended in February 2014. That's not recently. And they said at the same time as Trubnikov, the head of SVR, attended the seminar, but he attended the seminar in 15, right? 1 year difference. But they put it all together.
Of course, because they know that nobody knows when any of these people were there.
And I'm due like any day now. I'm literally at my doctor's appointment. I'm due any day now to give birth to my first child. And I receive at that point, I think it's all a joke, right? I think it's hysterical because it's just so not true. I think they've all gone nuts, right? At which point I receive a call from the chief reporter of the Times of London, our newspaper of record, chief reporter, knows my email address. How these people know this stuff, right? I mean, Dearlove obviously gave it to me. That's what people told me is Dearlove's work. And he says, I'm the spy. I'm this 9-month pregnant lady trying to finish my PhD. I'm the spy who somehow is involved in Russiagate. What? I laugh it off. My husband takes it seriously. We still don't understand what's going on. But he said, call your lawyer. I'm like, oh. He said, call your lawyer. Luckily, we have very serious libel laws in England. So my lawyer calls them up and says, yeah, you go ahead, publish. She's going to be very rich, right? Because, this is ridiculous story. They don't publish that story. So they publish a story about Cambridge penetration, but they don't put my name in it. The next thing that happens, and Chris Andrew pretends he doesn't know anything about it, and he suddenly becomes very ill, my professor.
Your professor.
Yeah, I ran to him to say I've got this, and he's like, oh, right, I'm very ill, like pretends he doesn't know anything about it. We now know that the day they published this article, December 15th, 2016, is the day that they changed the ICA conclusion. So what was happening on the other side of Atlantic, it's all coordination, remember?
And by ICA, you mean the Intelligence Community Assessment.
Right. So the way it works is theoretically, if it wasn't a conspiracy, but it was a general, normal job of the security services, after every election, the intelligence community needs to make a finding. Were there any irregularities? Were there any problems with the election? And Tulsi Gabbard released information saying that on, I think it was 8th of December, whatever that is, they had an intelligence community assessment before that. And Nunes confirms it because he was briefed as the member of,
I just want to make sure people understand. You're talking about a few months ago, Tulsi Gabbard confirmed that when they looked back at the original documents, what they saw was that in 2016, the original assessment from the intelligence community said that there had been no significant interference by Russia in the election.
Right. And secondly, of course, that there was no, because there was, that Russia did not help Trump, so there was nothing about contacts between Trump campaign and Russia.
That's right.
There was no any suggestion between that Russia was trying to help Trump. Nothing like that. It was just a normal election. And Congress gets briefed on that because Nunes was in the briefing as a senior member with access to classified intelligence.
Yes, Devin Nunes at the time was in the House. Yes.
Right. So it was just a normal election. But then what she finds is that then there's a meeting with Obama in December. And after that meeting with Obama, Clapper and Brennan order, and we have the emails, right? Because Tulsi Gabbard released them, the current DNI, saying change the assessment to make a finding that Russia interfered in the election to help Trump. It's an order she found.
That's the issue right there for John Brennan.
Right. So what then happens is they place this article, as I said, in the FT, right, saying that Russia interfered in London. And at the same time, in the assessment, on what basis do they say that, right? Like, let's take this seriously for 1 second. It's all fabricated. But on what basis can they say, like, Obama orders them to do it, but it didn't happen? Well, they only have one thing, which is me. Because there's no Russians in Russia collusion, right? That's what Nunes keeps
You're the only Russian.
I'm not, I was born there, but I'm a British citizen and lived there all my grown life. So if they don't have it, they have to create it. So what they do is they write like this big document or the Russia interfered, right? Like it looks, we can put it online, like the big headlines. Russia interfered, Putin personally ordered. And then they attach to it an appendix that they don't release to people, right? So it's classified. But the appendix is actually based on Halper and Steele. And we know that because it later got declassified. And within it says that they have an FBI source, which is actually a combined source, which is Halper and Steele, who told them that his sources in Moscow told him that Russia cultivated a senior Trump campaign advisor, i.e. General Flynn, by inviting him to this meeting in Moscow. And still, in addition, obviously, John McCain at the very same day, and we have that because it also got declassified by Grenell. John McCain goes to Comey and says that I have information from Steele that Flynn had an affair with a Russian woman in the UK.
Yes, let's not forget what a traitor John McCain really was.
And so they combine that's the assessment, because for the assessment, they need to establish two things in people's minds, right? One is Russia interfered in general, right? They have to establish that in people's minds. So but the second thing is specifically to help Trump.
Yes.
To tell American people that you did not elect him. You think you elected him, but you didn't. Actually, was a foreign enemy which is why they make this, they expel Russian diplomats at the same time, right? They say a foreign enemy we're effectively in war with, right? That's why they do this whole thing, right? It interfered in your elections, right? You did not elect him.
Yes.
And then but Trump can turn around and say, okay, maybe Russia did, maybe Russia did, I don't know, right? Like, I'm not the head of a say. However, I had nothing to do with it, right? They say, no. They need to then create this contact between Trump campaign and Russia. But there wasn't any contact between Trump campaign and Russian intelligence, so they need to create it, right? And so they recycle the same story, which you're probably sick of hearing about me and Flynn and Moscow. And
don't forget, Svetlana, at the same time, they wrote in the Steele dossier that he, that Russian intelligence had all this dirt on Trump, that he had gone to the hotel room where Obama had stayed and and had them pee on him. So there were other things that they were, using to.
But the crucial thing, which is where actually Mike Pompeo is up to his neck in this, etc., etc. They also said that they had a top secret source who is a senior person within Russian intelligence. And that's how the Steele dossier starts, right? So people heard about the prostitutes. But the crucial part of it is that Steele has a source in Moscow, who is the senior person within Russian intelligence, who told him that Putin personally told him to install Trump, right? And we have testimony of Bruce Orr. And Bruce Orr says that he asked Steele who that is, and he said he's the head of Russian foreign intelligence, the SVR. And we also have a note of the woman called Kavalech, who's at the State Department, and she asked him that as well. Steele, who is your source for this? He says, my source is Trubnikov. But Trubnikov is a friend of Halper. Right? So he's the former Russian head of Russian intelligence who visited Cambridge, but not in 16, but in 15. Halper then twists it, like he does with Flynn, like he does with me, like he does with Carter Page. He changes the date, and as long as he has a record of the meeting, he can attach any information. And yes, he does know the head of Russian intelligence, and yes, he visited Cambridge, and all he has to do is say, he told me Putin ordered me to do it, swap the date, forge it, and that becomes the key finding of the intelligence community assessment that Putin ordered
Which
Russia.
They all knew was a lie.
Right, but they had the source. And then what happens is General Rogers says, okay, but where is this stuff? Because he's in charge of SIGINT, right? And SIGINT is intercept. Yes. So had Putin ordered the head of Russian intelligence, there would be like a phone call, there would be an email, right? And they don't have it.
Wait, Svetlana, just wait, just so people remember, because they can get lost in all of these names. General Rogers, at the time, is head of the National Security Agency. So if there was any form of evidence, if there was any kind of conversation or anything about this, the NSA is the crown jewel of intelligence collection in the world, and they would have it. So General Rogers knows that this stinks, and so he questions it and says, but wait a minute, right?
Because he'd have a piece of paper. It would be a phone call, an intercepted text message. Yes. They say, no. Putin doesn't write anything down. We have a human source. We have this top CIA spy, which is Halper, right? How we know that? Because they put it in the New York Times, Rosenberg put it, that we have this top CIA spy who knows personally the head of Russian intelligence, and that's what he told me. So the reason why I don't have an intercept is because we have a source, right? But they don't tell him who the source is, because they know if they didn't tell him, Halper, the whole thing. They say, oh, we have this guy. Then Rogers keeps pressing on, and they give him another name of a guy called Smolenkov, who is like a junior operative in Cambridge, guy called Smolenkov, who's a junior operative in the Kremlin, not the CIA. He works for the CIA, but he's not an intelligence guy. He's an admin guy in charge of Putin's travel arrangements. He works for the CIA. And what they do is they tell Rogers he's the guy. And Rogers looks him up. This is all very well documented, and says, but this guy's like a junior travel guy, right? I'm not going to sign this off.
There's no way that Putin would be saying this to him.
Right. And they also switch. They start off by saying it's the head of intelligence that did it. But now it's like some guy, right? And then Roger said, well, I'm not signing that. And then they said, but you have to. Clapper and Brennan and Comey say you have to sign off, be a team player, right? We have no choice, sign it off. And he signs off. but he gives it medium. CIA, the CIA,
medium confidence. They have different ratings. Instead of it being a high level of confidence, he gives it a medium rating. Yes.
And then when the whole story about Halper explodes, and I keep saying, like, Halper is the guy who lied, that he had this meeting with Russian intelligence, etc.
Yeah.
What they do, true story, and this is under Pompeo, is they extradite this guy Smolenkov, who works for the CIA, but he's a junior guy. They do bait and switch. And they buy him a house in Washington under his own name for millions, right? And then they send Ken Dilanian, who's a CIA operative within MSNBC, to visit his house to say, hey, this is the spy who gave us all this information. And Pompeo does this press conference saying, oh my God, we have this really important spy. We exfiltrated him. But they give the address to the media, right? And then they hide the guy. And then they say he was this important guy. Because they're covering up again, this goes on and 18, they're covering up for Halper lying.
Yes, because you know what happens, Svetlana? When you tell a lie, it has no legs. And you have to keep telling another lie and another lie and another lie.
It's the cover-up.
Because they start collapsing. Yes, it's the cover-up.
But then what happens is, in order to cover up all these lies, they publish jointly. So they do a series of newspaper articles, first in 2017, to stand all of this up. So what happens is they rush this intelligence community assessment, which is based, remember, just to go back to this, this is what's currently under investigation. One of the things that's currently under investigation in Florida is they make a finding, Russia interfered, which we know that wasn't the finding. The second finding they made is Putin has ordered it. How they know Putin's ordered? Because they have a secret CIA source who is close to Putin, who in fact is Stefan Halper, lying about some has-been guy who wasn't even anywhere near this thing, right? And then that there were contacts between senior Trump campaign people and Russian intelligence, i.e. me. And this is where the fake story by Halper comes in, right? So these are the elements, because they need to have two elements. One is Russia interfered. Two, that there were that Trump campaign actively asked for this help, right? But all of this is BS. Then the next thing that happens is that Clapper meets with CNN and gives them this classified document, leaks it, based on the Steele dossier and Halper lies. And they make this story. This is, remember, about January 5th, January 6th, right, to do this. And this is at the same time as, remember, Obama has a meeting in the White House, how they're going to get rid of General Flynn. And they're going to use this story to get rid of him. So they need to back up this finding. And therefore, he orders to put the stories into the media, right, in order to make it look like Trump had Trump's senior campaign advisor, General Flynn, who is now national security advisor, is in fact a traitor. So Obama has a meeting in the Oval Office, remember, with Susan Rice and whatever, on January 5th. And then what happens is I suddenly get contacted by all these journalists, and the main one is Carol Lee, who is a personal friend of Obama. She was at the Wall Street Journal. She's now at MSNBC. But she's also been ordered by Ben Rhodes, I've been told, to do this, right?
Ben Rhodes.
Because the only person, because I suddenly, remember, I don't understand any of that, but I suddenly receive within 24 hours, I receive 4 emails from 4 unconnected journalists, David Ignatius, people from the Wall Street Journal, headed by Carol Lee, Matthew Rosenberg from New York Times, and The Guardian, who's connected with Christopher Steele, right? But I don't know that yet. And they all ask me about my relationship with a man that I met once 3 years ago at the dinner. So they all know what's in the FBI files because Comey and Halper and Steele and Schiff leaked it to them. This information. So the information is a lie, but it's highly classified. And we have a memo, right? And the memo is dated January 4th, where the agent in the case after the election decided to close down the Flynn investigation, close down Razor, because he said that they checked all the databases. There's nothing on me on Flynn, no derogatory information. Also, Flynn holds this high-level security clearance, which never been revoked. They never revoked the clearance. They never arrested him for having an affair with a Russian spy. They never removed his clearance, right? It's all smoke. And the FBI will shut down this investigation, the agents, because they know that Flynn's going to come in, find out this, and hell's going to break loose, right?
And they know it's not true.
And they
Most
know this is true.
importantly,
So they write
know it's
down a
not
piece
true.
of paper. We have the memo, which was released in the Flynn case, that the information in the Sphere 2 is inaccurate and implausible because Flynn was always accompanied. And
Always.
they write up the
also
memo
surveilled.
and say, close the Flynn case, January 4th. 10 minutes later, and President Trump, I tweeted this, President Trump retweeted this back in 2020. 10 minutes later, after they draft this memo, Peter Strzok text agents and said, don't close Razor.
Do not close it.
7th floor involved. Who's 7th floor?
Peter Strzok is at
Andy
the
McCabe,
time
Andy
Deputy Head of Counterintelligence for the FBI. That's very important for people to remember. Deputy Head of Counterintelligence for the FBI says, do not close the operation. 7th floor involved. And
Don't
the 7th floor.
So don't close the Flynn case, which is based on the Halper lie about the 7th floor. And who's 7th floor? It's
the
Comey.
7th floor involved.
7th floor is the 7th floor of the Hoover building, which is the headquarters of the FBI. And the only two people who sit there, well, plus probably some assistants, is the leadership. So it's Andy McCabe and Jim Comey. Why does Jim Comey want not to close the Razor case? Because he's going to go see Obama the next day, this famous Oval Office meeting, and he needs to have this investigation open because this document was released as part of the case where the DOJ was going to drop the case against General Flynn because the Logan Act stuff they came up with later about his conversation with the Russian ambassador.
All of that was nonsense.
They could not open based on that. So they had to keep open the original investigation about me and Flynn, right? Because it was already open. They couldn't close it because the other stuff wouldn't stick. So they had to keep it open. Why? Because they need to back up the intelligence community assessment, which they were leaking at that point to the media to make American people. But more importantly, remember that Senate was going to ratify the president, right?
But most importantly, Svetlana, if they tell the public there is an ongoing investigation, that makes somebody look like they're guilty. If they tell the public we investigated this, we found nothing, he's been cleared, the whole thing collapses.
Right.
So they have to keep it going. Look, we have to wrap
it. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than that because the target becomes Republican. So remember, initially, the target were American people who were either going to come to the election booth or not. Now the target is Republican Congress, right? And how do we know that? It's written down in the Fusion GPS book. John McCain meets with Christopher Steele because they can't now install Hillary Clinton. Not possible, right? Republican candidate won. They understand that. So they just want to replace Donald Trump with someone else, preferably Mike Pence or somebody like that, right? Their own deep state, another Republican.
Not against
so
him.
They have to initially, why they rush this assessment, they need to stop whatever they accuse the other side of doing, which is stop the Electoral College from approving the president. What's the formal word? Ratifying the presidency?
Yes, from ratifying the results of the election.
That's why they rushed it so much over Christmas period in 1 week or 2 weeks. Usually they take months. General Flynn says these assessments take months. They've done it in a week over Christmas. Government bureaucracy did that because Obama needed it. And the Fusion GPS founder writes in his book, that's because Christopher Steele, John McCain, and all these guys agreed that they're going to try, Republicans are going to try and stop the anti-Trump Republicans are going to try and persuade other Republicans to stop President Trump from being ratified. That's why in such a rush.
Yes. And they failed.
Then they failed. But they don't stop. The next thing they start working on is they need to bring about Mueller, right? So they are working on bringing about special counsel in order to impeach. And this is where it becomes like Watergate. What they mean by that is that Nixon was never actually impeached, but he was threatened with impeachment, and then he was replaced with Ford, who was unelected. So they were going to impeach President Trump or threaten him with impeachment so that he resigns voluntarily for the good of the country,
and
to replace them with Pence, right?
Yeah.
And so they start working. They don't stop. The conspiracy continues. It's all the same recycled story. Trump contact with Russia through General Flynn, through Carter Page, and this Russian intelligence guy who was installing Trump, etc., etc. That same story. They use it to bring about special counsel Mueller. And for that, they need all these newspaper articles because they don't have any evidence. So they keep the investigation open. And this is where my life erupts at that point.
And this is what you call trial by media, because they don't have real evidence that will stand up in a courtroom. So they try him in the media with inference and leaks and false information.
So what they do is my own professor of 20 years writes an article in the Times of London saying that at the dinner, so they fired General Flynn, you know, the story about lying to the FBI where he didn't lie. And then the next day, and David Ignatius, so Jim Clapper calls up David Ignatius and says, take out the kill shot on General Flynn. David Ignatius of the Washington Post. So the Washington Post published that first article saying that General Flynn had an inappropriate conversation with the Russian ambassador. He gets fired. Then there's a text message between David Kramer, who works for John McCain, and Christopher Steele saying that the first story went well. The text message in court proceedings, we have it. Now it's time to unleash the second Flynn story about me. David Ignatius flies to England, meets with my professor. My professor publishes an article saying that he was present at the 2014 dinner where General Flynn, who's now fired, showed all his attentions to the student of mine, to whom she showed an erotic photograph. I showed him a Stalin document. I didn't show him. Anyway. And that this woman, and then General Flynn invited my student, me, to Moscow with him. Never happened. As a simultaneous translator, I'm not even a translator, right? And that this shows like bad judgment and still said. Then Carol Lee, who's working for Obama, Matthew Rosenberg, who works for Brennan, Adam Goldman, who works for Comey, Guardian, who works for Christopher Steele, they all, on the same day, contact me, and they all have the same thing about my affair with General Flynn, right? Because it's part of this plan to. So there were two parts to this Flynn story. One, he gets fired over Kislyak, inappropriate contact with the Russian ambassador. And two, they need to give the backstory about this. Why? Because they need to stand up this intelligence community assessment that said that Russia interfered to install Trump. So they bring in and David Nunes, who was the head of the Intel Committee at the time for the Congress, he says. There's a very famous video where Nunes is speaking to Mueller, right? Like Mueller is giving evidence. And David Nunes says that the first Trump associate who was being investigated by Mueller was General Flynn. And this investigation was based on an article placed by Christopher Andrew and Richard Dielov, right? So what happens is this affair story, manufactured by Halper and Dielov and Andrew, was the basis for the Mueller, and Mueller does this, I can't comment, but that was the basis for the Mueller investigation. And they opened the Mueller investigation in order to impeach Trump.
But Svetlana, we've got to get back to the Brennan case, because that's where we began, and we haven't, we have to wrap this up. So I just want to end with this. Right now, what has happened is that John Brennan and his attorneys have acknowledged this, and they have indicated how seriously they're taking it, because Brennan's attorneys they're now trying to do everything they can to get out of this. And what you really have is a grand jury proceeding, which is secret, so we don't know exactly what's going on behind closed doors, but we do know, because we've had confirmation from Andy McCabe that he has been subpoenaed. There's been confirmation.
So to interrupt, there's specific dates. So the government can't comment because it's secret, but the coup plotters leaked to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, etc., that the subpoenas that they need to appear in front of a grand jury, but they also have to submit documents to the grand jury. And the documents start with July 2016, where, remember Hillary Plan document? They go through December 2016, which is the intelligence community assessment, and into February 2017, which is the firing of General Flynn. So all the elements we've just been through, we were explaining them, because these are the documents that show you the conspiracy, and these are the documents that the defendants have to submit.
Right. So these documents have been subpoenaed from every single, from reportedly from
30.
20 to 30. Yes, we don't know exactly because the proceedings are secret, but it has been reported that up to 30 people have been subpoenaed in this case. And so the first person the case centers around is John Brennan and his role in the origins of the Russia investigation, because they know that it's fake. They know that it was a setup. They know that it was treason. And so they've got John Brennan on the ropes here, and most of the country is not paying a whole lot of attention to this, but John Brennan's attorneys, they have made a public statement that they're accusing the Department of Justice of judge shopping and trying to get this into before a friendly judge. And the judge that they're talking about is Aileen Connor, because she's the one who threw the documents, the Trump documents, the Mar-a-Lago case.
And sorry to interrupt, the relevance of that from our perspective is these are the documents we mentioned very quickly, but everything we've just been discussing has been documented. And President Trump declassified all of this. The main thing is the CIA involvement. Who is the CIA involvement? Is Halper, who works for Brennan, roughly, right?
Right.
So Halper works for Brennan. Brennan pays him through the FBI, through the CIA, etc. And they operate out of Britain. President Trump declassified all of this. They reclassified it retroactively. Then they raided his house, took the documents away. It's a really bad thing that happened, but that gives the jurisdiction in Florida, because part of the conspiracy is covering up the conspiracy, right?
Yes. So then and people have said, why is this case taking place in Florida? This shouldn't be in Florida. This is the Trump administration
because it's
trying
evidence of their Russiagate crimes. And the judge who's on the case was the judge who threw this case out because she saw the documents and she realized they were not classified.
Just to be clear, the reason this case is taking place in Florida is because Mar-a-Lago, Florida was the scene of the raid where they tried to seize these documents as part of the ongoing cover-up.
And that's how they furthered the conspiracy forward, because remember Alan Kohler, who's the guy in London originally, working with Jenna Haskell, working with Christopher, he is the one who organized the raid, and he just now admitted it. It's been issued in a new book. But also he worked together with Lisa Monaco. Lisa Monaco is an Obama person who became Deputy Attorney General under Biden. And she was the one whom Alan Kohler briefed on the raid. And also Avril Haines, who used to be Brennan's deputy, and she became Director of National Intelligence. So this is the group that reclassified these documents and then seized them, and they reclassified them for national security reasons. And they say in all these books now they're writing about this, that they were concerned that these documents will expose operations and spies. Who are the operations and spies? Halper, right? That's it. That's a very simple.
And this is just how they cover up the fact that this was a CIA operation, cover up CIA involvement and their own personal involvement.
And Brennan is upset because this judge, after they seized these records and they secretly reclassified them. So President Trump didn't even know they did it. We only know about it because I looked it up on the FBI database. Well, Durham people told me that my documents are gone, and that's why they couldn't prosecute people involved in this, because they could not take to court cases which are classified, right? So I knew about that. And then I found proof of it because I went on the FBI's own website, and the same document side by side that I have declassified, it's completely blanked out for national security reason. And the date is May 2022, which is 3 months before the raid. And they classified it until 2091. Luckily, President Trump now came back to power and reclassified it again. So we now have the documents. But the point...
Declassified it all over again.
So declassified. But the point is that why this raid is part of it is because they were trying to hide the evidence of their own crimes and twisted into as if President Trump held classified documents, which he didn't, and gave it to me, who's a Russian spy, who I'm not, and he didn't give it to me. So then what happens is this judge knows all of this, right? She knows what's in the documents, which is, they say, involvement. So that's why, because she saw it originally when she was saving President Trump from this bullshit case. So Brennan doesn't want this judge because she knows the whole story.
She doesn't want the same judge because she knows too much. That's why. And so they're trying to accuse the DOJ of judge shopping and other things. We don't know if there's been a ruling on that. Nothing has been made public yet. So it seems reasonable that there hasn't been a ruling. Certainly if there'd been a ruling in favor of John Brennan and all the others like Annie McCabe and Comey and Clapper who have received subpoenas, then you would think that we would know about it.
Well, we also know, but they're very scared because John Brennan just traveled to London on the 5 days before subpoenas were due. They were due at Thanksgiving, all these documents. He appeared in London, Parliament, the upper chambers of the London Parliament, with David Ormond, who is a friend of my professor Christopher Andrew and Richard Zillow. So he obviously went to London, Brennan, presumably to discuss this cover-up. Then we also know that Andy McCabe just had a podcast with Richard Dillov.
Yes,
So
where he
all
talked
these
about being
guys,
subpoenaed.
we can sort of, they obviously are worried. I don't know whether we're going to have accountability or not, but from their behavior, it appears that they're concerned about it because they're communicating with each other covertly, right? Like Brennan flew to London. Why would he need to fly to London?
Which is typical of the tactics that they use, right? That's what that Cambridge group was using. Okay, so we have to close. I have to
Jim
now.
Final point. Jim Clapper, though, is very quiet. So he's another one who confirmed that he's been subpoenaed because he's in front and center of all of this as well. But he said he lawyered up.
I've heard about that. It's another one who's involved,
right? And then Obama, of course, also just recently visited London in September, October time when all this case kicked off. So basically, what we know,
conspire with their foreign allies and co-conspirators.
Yeah. And so what would be interesting is that Obama ordered it. So Brennan, if this case goes forward, presumably Brennan's going to try and blame Obama. And Obama's going to try and blame Brennan, but he has immunity. So this is interesting, right? How it's going to work. If this case proceeds, right, what we're going to watch out for, what's going to be very interesting, is Brennan's going, if he can't kick this case out of court, and I don't think he can because it's a good jurisdiction and because he's guilty. Then he will say, I was ordered to do that by Obama, which is why he took those notes, remember, right? So in case, they're all lawyers, right? Obama, then, he has immunity. But what that means is that he can't lie because he can't be prosecuted as the president, right?
Yeah,
but if he lies,
he can't lie.
Right, but if he does lie, because he's no longer president, then he opens up himself for perjury. So he might as well tell the truth. Right? And I presume that that's why they're flying him in and out of London. 3 times he's been in September, October period, which is when this case...
what it is. All covering their butts. So the cover-up continues, the conspiracy continues, and curiously, this case that is about the one thing millions of Americans want more than anything else is accountability for the crimes that have been committed against this country, for the American traitors who have conspired with their foreign allies. The one thing they want is for these people to be held accountable. And it just may be that in this Florida case, that is where we are headed, to real accountability. It's only John Brennan at this time. The others have been subpoenaed. We don't know yet if there's been any kind of finding for the grand jury. It doesn't appear so because nothing's been made public. But this is why I say that this is one to watch. I will be talking to you again, Svetlana. You, as I said in the beginning, you have encyclopedic knowledge of these cases. And I know it's hard for people. All of the documents that you referenced, the podcast with Andy McCabe and so on, these things are available on the website so that people can go back to this. You can study it. It's really worth taking the time because what is this about? It's about the American people knowing and understanding the truth so that these people who have abused and misused their power and their positions and have lied about it repeatedly, they get held to the same standard as everybody else, and they don't get away.
You have this voice, right? You can be rich, you can be poor, you can be high up or not, but all of you have the right to choose the president you want to choose. That's your constitution. That's your God-given right. Now, they said, no, we're not going to let you do it. These people, right, all conspired and say, no, you don't know what you're doing, right? We're not going to that. So Andy McCabe, the British, all these globalists, Soros. Why should Soros dictate, right? You cannot, so all that we've been through, like the weeds of all of this, because what we've been trying to do is educate the people. And the reason why we're doing that is that the people remain vigilant, right? And watch over their representatives, right? So that Congress, that the DOJ, all these people don't fall asleep in the wheel, right? So we need people to be educated, vocal, and keep an eye on that, right? Not just hope that things are happening, but demand accountability. But the reason why we need to demand accountability is because you can't let them dictate. Luckily President Trump came back to power, right? But he was almost assassinated. He was nearly jailed. And they did obviously manage to install Joe Biden.
Yes, and they're still trying to kill him. And they might do it.
And I said back in 2019 or 2018, 2019, that if we don't get accountability for this Russiagate, they're going to do it again. And they did it with Biden, right? So what I'm trying to say now is don't let them. I've done my work now, right? I'm not American. I've been unfortunately brought into this against my will. But as well, I am an ally in the sense that, as a Brit, we're an ally with the United States, but also as a human, I want for our children the world where they can grow up, which is not this corrupt, right? But I've done everything I can possibly do to lay out all the evidence. But now it's the American people who are listening to this. What I want you to do is not let up, right? Do not let up.
Yeah.
So
do not let up.
Yeah.
Do not surrender. Do not let up. Svetlana, we're going to come back to you. We're going to talk to you about this again. We're going to stay on top of this. We have to go. Thank you so, so much for joining us. You are a force of nature, a brilliant woman, and you have so much moral courage. I have enormous respect for you.
Thank you.
And I'm sincerely grateful for everything that you've done.
I'm very grateful, Lara, because you're one of the few people, because, now it's a new administration. People think, things are different. But the bureaucracy is the same. I know President Trump wants accountability for you guys. And it's very important, Lara, the work you're doing every day is relentless. You don't get much sleep, but you have to stay on it because we have to hold these people accountable. Be vigilant.
Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. Nobody likes a quitter, Svetlana, and you and I are not quitters.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your audience for all your support as well.
Yes, thank you very much to our audience. We can do absolutely nothing without you. You are everything to us. So please like, share, subscribe, get this out to as many people as you can. If you want to support independent journalism, support our work, you can go to laralogan.com and find the join button. And as always, it is my great pleasure to say to you all, thank you so much for being bold enough to go rogue with Lara Logan.